Beneath the cold mists and crumbling stone walls of medieval England lies a tapestry of enigmas, threads of history woven with shadows, secrets, and silences that defy the passage of time. In this land of towering castles and candlelit halls, the echoes of forgotten voices still linger, carried on winds that whisper through deserted abbeys and moss-covered ruins. Here, truth is often buried beneath layers of myth, and the line between fact and fable blurs into an unsettling twilight. What became of the lost treasures whispered about by monarchs and monks? Why do certain battlefields remain littered with artifacts whose purpose no one can explain? And what dark forces, or human hands, crafted the events that still leave historians divided centuries later? These are not just old stories, they are unanswered questions, fragments of a past that refuses to reveal itself completely. So settle in, keep your mind open, and prepare to step back into a world where every shadow might hide a clue, because tonight we dive deep into the mysteries of medieval England. Beneath the looming shadows of the White Tower, the heart of London's imposing fortress, stone walls rise thick and impenetrable, their weathered surfaces holding the weight of centuries. The Tower of London, with its cold, gray battlements, is a place steeped in power, fear, and whispered secrets, a stage where history's dramas have unfolded in full view, and yet where certain truths have remained forever concealed. It is here, within these ancient walls, that one of England's most enduring mysteries took root: the disappearance of the princes in the Tower. It is the summer of 1483. England is in the final throes of the Wars of the Roses, the decades-long struggle between the rival houses of York and Lancaster. King Edward IV is dead, leaving the throne to his young son, Edward V, a boy of only 12. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is named Lord Protector, entrusted with safeguarding the kingdom until Edward comes of age. The boy king, along with his 9-year-old brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, is brought to the Tower of London. Officially, they are housed there for their protection, but in the medieval mind, the Tower was not only a royal residence, it was also a prison. The boys are seen playing in the gardens, looking down from barred windows, speaking to attendants. Then, without warning, the sightings stop. No one outside the tower claims to have seen them again. Rumors spread quickly. Were they moved? Were they ill? Or had something far more sinister occurred behind the high walls and under the watch of their uncle? The political context is crucial. Within weeks, Richard declares his nephews illegitimate, claiming their father's marriage was invalid. The crown passes to him. He becomes King Richard III. The princes, meanwhile, remain out of sight. Chroniclers of the time, such as the Italian observer Dominic Mancini, write that the boys were withdrawn from public view, their appearances growing less frequent until they vanished altogether. Mancini hints at something darker, that the young king and his brother were seen less and less behind the bars and windows until they disappeared entirely. The most widely accepted theory, at least among later Tudor historians, is that Richard III had the boys killed to secure his hold on the throne. Yet, compelling as it may seem, this narrative rests on circumstantial evidence. No contemporary document, no confession, and no body was found at the time to confirm it. And here the story begins to shift, from recorded history into the realm of speculation. Some point to Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham, as the possible culprit. Once a close ally of Richard III, Buckingham had his own ambitions and could have acted without the king's knowledge, removing the princes to serve his own designs. Others whisper that Henry Tudor, later Henry VII, might have ordered their deaths after seizing power in 1485, eliminating any lingering Yorkist claimants and then pinning the crime on Richard to strengthen his legitimacy. The mystery deepened in 1674, when workmen at the tower uncovered a wooden chest beneath a staircase in the White Tower. Inside were two small skeletons. King Charles II ordered them interred in Westminster Abbey as the remains of the lost princes. But without the science of modern forensics, no definitive identification was possible. Centuries later, when examinations were carried out in the 1930s, the findings suggested they could indeed be boys of about the right ages, but there was no way to confirm they were Edward and Richard. Even now, requests for DNA analysis remain contentious, tangled in politics, royal permissions, and questions of historical propriety. And then, there are the stranger possibilities, the theories that live on the fringes of academic acceptance. Some suggest the princes were never killed at all, but smuggled out of the tower in secrecy, perhaps spirited away to Flanders or Brittany to live under assumed names. The story of Perkin Warbeck, a pretender to the English throne in the 1490s, is often tied to this theory. Warbeck claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury. The younger prince miraculously escaped from death. He gained the support of some European monarchs and even Yorkist loyalists at home, men and women who claimed they recognized the boy they had once known. Was he truly the lost prince, or merely a skilled impostor groomed for political advantage? Others propose the prince's fate was known to only a few, and that their deaths were not the result of a single ruthless order, but of a chain of events, neglect, illness, or an accidental death, covered up to avoid political scandal. The silence of those close to power may have been driven not by guilt, but by a desire to preserve stability in a volatile time. Over the centuries, the disappearance of the princes has become as much a mirror for the ambitions and biases of historians as it is a mystery of medieval politics. Tudor chroniclers such as Thomas More painted Richard III as a villainous usurper, an image cemented by Shakespeare's enduring portrayal of a hunchbacked, scheming tyrant. But others, especially in modern times, have questioned whether Richard has been unjustly maligned, a victim of historical propaganda. In the absence of hard proof, each retelling reshapes the contours of the story, adding or removing shadows depending on the teller's perspective. Standing in the tower today, it is difficult not to feel the presence of the past pressing in. The air inside the White Tower is cool and heavy. The stones are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The windows look out over a city transformed, yet the view from those narrow openings is much the same as it would have been in 1483. Somewhere within these walls, two boys once played, laughed, and dreamed of a future that never came. Were they victims of a calculated murder? Pawns in a political game whose end came quietly, unseen? Or survivors hidden away, their true fate lost to history? The answers remain buried. Perhaps beneath the tower itself, perhaps in an unmarked grave far from London, perhaps in documents still locked away in private collections. And so, the mystery endures, a fragment of the past that refuses to yield its truth. The tower keeps its secrets well. And until they are revealed, the princes in the tower will remain more than a historical case. They will be a question, suspended in time, waiting for an answer that may never come. From the shadowed corridors of the Tower of London, our journey takes us west, into the rolling green of Gloucestershire, where the Severn River winds its way through quiet meadows and villages that seem untouched by time. Here, rising above the landscape with weathered dignity, stands Berkeley Castle, a fortress of thick stone walls and ancient towers, its foundations laid in the Norman age. At first glance, it appears as a picturesque relic of England's medieval past, but within these walls, nearly 7 centuries ago, a drama of power, betrayal, and perhaps unspeakable cruelty unfolded. The death of King Edward II. It is the year 1327. Edward II has been forced to abdicate in favor of his teenage son, Edward III. His downfall was swift and absolute. Once King of England, he is now a prisoner, confined first at Kenilworth, then transferred to Berkeley Castle under the custody of Thomas, Lord Berkeley, and Sir John Maltravers. Officially, this was for his safety. In reality, it was an arrangement steeped in political calculation. Edward's wife, Queen Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, held the reins of power. Edward's continued existence was a threat, one that might inspire loyalists to rally and attempt his restoration. The records tell us that on the night of September 21st, 1327, Edward II died in captivity. The official explanation, circulated quickly and quietly, was that he succumbed to natural causes, possibly illness brought on by the damp and unhealthy conditions of his imprisonment. Chroniclers of the time mention that the king's body was viewed in public before burial, as if to reinforce the notion that no foul play had taken place. Yet even in the 14th century, few seemed convinced. Whispers spread through court and countryside alike, whispers of murder. The most infamous account comes from later chroniclers, who claimed Edward was killed in a manner both brutal and symbolic. A red-hot poker inserted into his body, leaving no outward marks of violence, thus concealing the cause of death. The lurid detail, repeated for generations, has become inseparable from his legend. But was it truth, or a piece of political theater crafted to shock and discredit those in power? Contemporary sources closest to the event do not mention such a method. The tale surfaces decades later, perhaps the product of rumor, propaganda, or a chronicler's embellishment. Other theories abound. Some suggest that Edward was smothered in his bed by his captors, an efficient and silent method in keeping with political assassinations of the era. Others point to the possibility of starvation or poisoning, methods that could be disguised as natural decline. Berkeley Castle itself, with its thick, damp-walled dungeon, was hardly a place conducive to survival, especially for a man already weakened by months of imprisonment. Yet, the mystery deepens when we turn to the more unlikely but persistent strand of the story, that Edward II did not die at Berkeley Castle at all. According to some accounts, a deal was struck between his custodians and sympathizers. In this version, a body, perhaps that of another prisoner, was buried in Edward's place, while the former king was spirited away, eventually finding refuge abroad. The Fieschi letter, written years later by an Italian cleric to Edward III, describes in detail how Edward supposedly escaped to the continent, living for years as a hermit before dying quietly in exile. While historians have debated the authenticity of this letter, its level of detail has kept it from being entirely dismissed. And then there is the curious case of William the Welshman, a figure who appeared in the 1330s claiming to be Edward II. Though lacking strong political backing, his emergence reignited rumors that the former king was still alive. Some suggest this was an impostor seeking advantage. Others wonder if the resemblance and timing were too convenient to ignore. Inside Berkeley Castle today, visitors are shown the so-called King's Room, where Edward is said to have been held. The air is cool and heavy, the light dim, filtered through narrow, arched windows. The stone walls seem to press in, and the silence carries a strange weight, as though the events of that September night linger just beyond the reach of certainty. Guides speak of the dungeon beneath, where the king might have heard the cries of peacocks, birds that roamed the castle grounds, their eerie calls perhaps mingling with the sounds of guards at watch. It is here, amid these walls, that the line between fact and legend dissolves. If we accept the mainstream version, that Edward was quietly murdered to secure Mortimer and Isabella's grip on power, it fits neatly into the brutal logic of medieval politics. But if we entertain the possibility of his survival, then what we know of the early reign of Edward III becomes more complex. Could a living, hidden Edward II have shaped events from the shadows? Could his son have known, or even tacitly approved of his exile? The death of Edward II, or his disappearance, remains one of England's most debated royal mysteries. Each version of the story tells us as much about the politics of the time as it does about the man himself. The chroniclers, often writing years later, were influenced by loyalties, grudges, and the need to craft moral lessons from history. And yet, somewhere beneath the layers of hearsay and speculation, there lies a truth, whether it is a truth of murder in the night or of a fallen king walking unknown roads in foreign lands. Berkeley Castle has endured, its walls weathered but unbroken. The chamber where Edward was kept still stands, a silent witness to whatever transpired there. Was it a place of death or the beginning of an unlikely escape? No conclusive evidence has ever been found to close the case. Instead, the story sits suspended between fact and fable, inviting each generation to wonder which version they believe. And so, as the shadows lengthen over the castle grounds and the last light fades from the Severn Valley, the question remains: was Edward II truly buried in Gloucester Cathedral in 1327, or did he live to see another dawn far from the land that had once been his kingdom? From the dim corridors of Berkeley Castle, our path leads us eastward, across the rolling farmlands of Cambridgeshire and into the mist-laden marshes of the fenlands. Here, where the land and water have long wrestled for dominance, lies the Wash, a vast estuary of shifting tides, treacherous mudflats, and hidden channels. It is a place that can seem desolate and infinite all at once, where the wind carries the cries of seabirds over a gray horizon, and the ground beneath one's feet feels uncertain, as though it might swallow whatever lingers too long. It was here, in the autumn of 1216, that England is said to have lost not just a king's treasure, but one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the medieval age, the fate of King John's crown jewels. By this time, King John's reign was crumbling. The barons had rebelled, foreign forces threatened invasion, and the ink on the Magna Carta, signed and then swiftly annulled, was still fresh in the minds of his enemies. John had been campaigning relentlessly, moving his forces and supplies through hostile territory. In October, suffering from illness and seeking the safety of the abbey at Swineshead, he ordered his baggage train to take a different route. The king himself rode inland. His wagons, laden with wealth and regalia, were to cross the Wash at low tide. What those wagons carried remains the subject of legend and record alike: gold and silver plate, precious relics, ceremonial robes, and the crown jewels of England. These were not merely symbols of royal authority, they were the tangible proof of sovereignty, the objects upon which oaths were sworn and legitimacy declared. The story goes that the baggage train misjudged the tide. The Wash is notorious for its sudden surges and treacherous sands. As the wagons rolled onto the causeway, the tide turned. Water rushed in, swallowing carts, horses, and men. Some accounts suggest the mud trapped them, others that the rising waters simply swept the treasure away into the estuary. By the time the tide receded, nothing remained. Days later, King John lay dead, felled not by the tide, but by dysentery, leaving behind a kingdom in turmoil and a treasure that, officially, was never recovered. On the surface, this is a story of bad luck and worse planning. The Wash is a dangerous place, even in the modern day. A single misstep can lead to disaster. But as with so many medieval accounts, the gaps in the record invite questions. Did the treasure truly vanish beneath the waves? Skeptics point out that the details come from chroniclers who often wrote years later, their accounts shaped by political agendas. Some have suggested the loss was exaggerated, or even fabricated, by those who benefited from the disappearance. Could it have been a convenient cover for theft, the treasure quietly divided among loyal retainers or opportunistic enemies? Local legends tell of gold glinting beneath shallow waters, of coins washing ashore in the years that followed. In the centuries since, fishermen and treasure hunters alike have claimed to have found fragments, rings, buckles, or jewel-studded fittings said to match the era. None, however, have been definitively linked to the royal hoard. The silts and sands of the Wash shift constantly. Even if the treasure lies buried there, it may have moved miles from where it first sank, sealed under layers of mud too deep for casual recovery. There are those who suggest the treasure was never in the Wash at all. In this version, the route was a ruse, a misdirection to mask its transport elsewhere, perhaps to a friendly port or hidden stronghold. If so, the jewels could have been smuggled abroad, sold quietly to raise funds for loyalist causes, or absorbed into the treasuries of other courts. Some even speculate that items of the hoard might still sit, unrecognized in private collections or cathedral treasuries, stripped of their provenance over the centuries. Archaeological surveys of the Wash have, so far, found no conclusive trace of the hoard. Modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, sonar mapping, has been deployed in some areas, but the sheer size and instability of the estuary make the task daunting. The Wash is not a static landscape. It breathes with the tide, its channels shifting and erasing the past as surely as it hides it. And yet, the lure of the lost crown jewels endures. For historians, the mystery is not merely about gold and gems, but about what the loss or disappearance says of King John's final days. Was it the act of a desperate monarch caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or the closing chapter in a carefully orchestrated deception, the true fate of the jewels known only to a select few? Standing on the edge of the Wash at low tide, the land stretches out into a gleaming expanse of wet sand and shallow pools, the air thick with salt. It is easy to imagine the slow, labored passage of heavy wagons across this uncertain ground, the sudden, shocking arrival of the tide, and the chaos that must have followed. It is just as easy to imagine, in the mind's eye, the wagons never coming this way at all, their contents disappearing into the fog of history along a road far from here. Whatever the truth, the Wash has kept its secret for over 800 years. Perhaps the jewels lie beneath its restless waters, waiting for the day when they will be unearthed. Or perhaps they were never here to begin with, scattered long ago, hidden in plain sight. And so, the question remains, are England's lost crown jewels buried in the shifting mud of the fenlands, or in the far more elusive terrain of myth and misdirection? From the shifting tides of the Wash, where King John's treasure may still lie hidden, our path turns inland, east toward Kent, where the rolling hills give way to market towns and winding lanes lined with timber-framed houses. Here, in the summer of 1450, the air was thick not with salt and sea spray, but with the murmur of dissent. The streets of London would soon echo with the sound of thousands of boots, farmers, craftsmen, and discontented gentry marching under the banner of a man who called himself Jack Cade. Yet behind Cade's name and bold rhetoric lay another question, one that history has never fully answered. Who truly stood beside him, guiding his rebellion from the shadows? The uprising began as a protest against corruption and misrule in the final years of King Henry VI's troubled reign. Cade, a figure of uncertain origins, emerged as the leader of this movement. Some claimed he was an Irishman, others that he had served as a soldier in France. He called himself John Mortimer, a name with dangerous connotations, Mortimer being a family tied to royal blood and rival claims to the throne. Whether this was a calculated move or a coincidence remains debated, but it added weight to the suspicion that Cade was not acting alone. The demands of the rebels, laid out in the famous Complaint of the Poor Commons of Kent, were pointed but organized, accusing royal advisors of corruption, mismanagement of funds, and betrayal in the ongoing war with France. These were not the words of a mob in chaos, but of a movement with political awareness, perhaps even legal counsel. Could Cade himself have crafted them? Or were these articles shaped by men with greater political knowledge, men who wished to remain hidden while Cade took the risks of open rebellion? Chroniclers of the time, such as Raphael Holinshed and the anonymous author of Gregory's Chronicle, hint at the involvement of disgruntled nobles and former royal officials. Some named Sir William Oldhall, Speaker of the House of Commons and a known critic of the court, as a possible backer. Others whispered of Richard, Duke of York, who was at odds with Henry VI's advisors and had both motive and resources to stir unrest, though no direct link was ever proven. The rebellion itself was a striking show of discipline. Cade's men occupied London for several days, enforcing order, executing corrupt officials, and holding courts in the streets. It was as though the rebellion had been rehearsed. How could a self-proclaimed commoner, with no known experience in governance, manage such a feat without guidance? Was Cade a gifted leader in his own right, or was he the front man for a carefully coordinated faction within England's fractured political elite? When the tide of fortune turned against him, after looting broke out and the citizens of London turned hostile, Cade fled south. He was eventually captured and mortally wounded in Sussex, his head displayed on London Bridge. Official records speak little of trials or executions for other leaders. Many rebels were pardoned. Some simply disappeared from history. This absence of follow-up raises the question, were the co-conspirators too well connected to pursue? Did they retreat into the safety of their estates and offices once the rising failed? More speculative theories suggest Cade's rebellion was, in part, a cover for a wider intelligence network, one that sought to test the loyalty of the capital, gauge military responses, and weaken the king's authority in preparation for larger power plays to come. If so, Cade's co-conspirators would not have been mere Kentish malcontents, but agents in a dangerous political chess game that would eventually erupt into the Wars of the Roses. The evidence is tantalizing, yet elusive. Surviving court rolls, letters, and chronicles offer fragments: a merchant who quietly supplied the rebels with food and weapons, a clerk who drafted their formal grievances, a noble household whose servants were seen among the marchers. But none of these pieces fit neatly into a full picture. Were these isolated acts of sympathy, or threads in a larger hidden web? Even the choice of Cade's alias invites speculation. John Mortimer was not just a name. It was a symbol, a rallying cry for those who opposed the king's advisors and saw the Duke of York as England's rightful leader. Did Cade adopt it on his own, seeking to borrow its political weight, or was he instructed to use it as a signal to sympathetic factions? And if the latter, what promises might have been made to him in exchange for such a dangerous role? Today, the fields and lanes where Cade's rebels gathered have grown quiet. In the village of Heathfield, where he was finally overtaken, the air is still, the hedgerows thick with summer growth. Standing here, it is difficult to imagine the charged atmosphere of 1450, when suspicion, rumor, and ambition moved through England like a storm. What we know of Jack Cade's rebellion comes filtered through official records and chroniclers who often wrote with a political bias. The victors of history had little interest in preserving the names of those who might have aided a rebel leader. As a result, the truth lies somewhere beyond the reach of certainty, perhaps in documents lost to fire and neglect, perhaps in the guarded memories of those who lived through it and chose silence over exposure. And so, the mystery endures. Was Jack Cade the sole architect of his uprising, a common man who briefly seized the reins of history? Or was he the visible face of an invisible alliance, the pawn of men whose ambitions stretched far beyond the walls of London? Until new evidence emerges, the identities of Cade's co-conspirators remain locked in the shadows, hidden in the spaces between what we can prove and what we can only suspect. From the murky intrigues of Jack Cade's rebellion, our trail drifts into a realm where history blurs into legend. a place where stone, soil, and story intertwine so tightly that separating fact from myth becomes an act of near impossibility. In the green heart of England, amid rolling hills, ancient abbey ruins, and shadowed woodland paths, whispers persist of a relic unmatched in fame or sanctity: the Holy Grail. The Grail's image is woven deep into Western imagination, a sacred cup, dish, or vessel linked to Christ's Last Supper, said to have caught his blood at the crucifixion. In medieval romance, it is both a Christian relic and a mystical object, capable of granting divine grace or eternal life to those worthy of finding it. The Arthurian poets and chroniclers placed the Grail in the hands of noble knights, sending them across wild, enchanted landscapes in quests that tested not only courage but purity of spirit. But could this object of such renown have ever rested on English soil? Some point first to Glastonbury in Somerset, a place that even in medieval times was steeped in layers of legend. The ruins of Glastonbury Abbey rise like skeletal fingers against the sky, their arches framing the windswept hills beyond. Here, monks once claimed that Joseph of Arimathea, the biblical figure who provided the tomb for Jesus, had journeyed to Britain in the 1st century. According to the tale, he brought with him a vessel of sacred blood, the Holy Grail itself, and buried it somewhere near the abbey grounds. Springs in the area, such as the Chalice Well, run with iron-rich water that stains the stone red, inspiring the belief that it was sanctified by the relic's presence. Could this ancient well conceal the Grail? Or is the story a pious invention meant to draw pilgrims and their donations? Others look to the remote landscapes of Shropshire, where rugged hills and half-forgotten churches hold their own secrets. In Hawkstone Park, a network of caves and grottos carved into the sandstone carries an air of ritual and concealment. Local tradition once held that Templar knights, those warrior monks whose history is itself cloaked in secrecy, hid sacred treasures here during the suppression of their order in the early 14th century. Could the Grail have been among them, spirited across the Channel to a place beyond royal reach? Then there is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, though not in England proper, often drawn into Grail discussions because of its intricate stone carvings, some of which seem to echo biblical and Templar imagery. If the Grail traveled north, might it have passed first through English strongholds, guarded by a chain of loyal keepers? Mainstream historians are quick to point out that there is no contemporary documentary evidence linking England to the Grail's actual existence, let alone its resting place. The earliest written Grail romances, such as Chrétien de Troyes' Perceval, were works of literature, not historical records. Yet even in the Middle Ages, such stories were often used to veil or encode truths, especially truths dangerous to speak plainly. If a relic as potent as the Grail did exist, would it have been openly displayed? Or would it have been hidden, guarded by a select few who understood both its power and the dangers it might invite? More speculative theories link the Grail to the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII. As abbeys were seized and treasures confiscated, countless religious artifacts disappeared, some destroyed, others spirited away into private hands. Could the Grail, if it had ever been in England, have vanished during this upheaval, its identity known only to the monks who safeguarded it? The Grail's location might not be a single site at all, if some modern interpretations are to be considered. A few researchers suggest it could have been moved repeatedly, perhaps traveling from Glastonbury to remote shrines, or even buried in barrows or beneath parish churches in rural corners of the country. Others believe the Grail is not a physical object, but a symbol, a code embedded in architecture, art, and landscape alignments, pointing toward a deeper spiritual truth rather than a tangible artifact. Standing at Glastonbury Tor at sunset, the wind rushing over the high ridge and the lowlands stretching out in all directions, it is not hard to see why such a place invites belief. The land itself feels like a story half told, its hills and hollows shaped by both geology and imagination. Pilgrims still climb here, some seeking history, others seeking something more elusive, a sense of connection to the mythic past. The Holy Grail's possible presence in England is a mystery that lives at the crossroads of faith, literature, and archaeology. There are no royal writs declaring its arrival, no inventory lists its weight in gold, no contemporary chronicler describes its appearance. And yet, the stories persist, carried forward by generations who felt certain that somewhere, hidden beneath layers of stone and time, a vessel of extraordinary significance once lay. Was it brought here by Joseph of Arimathea, as the monks of Glastonbury claimed? Was it hidden by the Templars, entrusted to loyal keepers in the green heart of the country? Or is the Grail's true resting place not in any vault or shrine, but in the human longing for a perfect and unreachable truth? Until evidence emerges, an object, a document, a discovery that ties myth to material fact. The Grail in England remains both everywhere and nowhere, concealed not just by earth and stone, but by the imagination itself. And so we are left to wonder, is the Holy Grail a relic awaiting rediscovery in some quiet English hollow, or is it a riddle that will never be solved? From the shadowed hills that might cradle the Holy Grail, we turn east, into the soft, low landscapes of Suffolk, fields edged with hedgerows, where the air carries the scent of earth and the slow rhythm of rural life has changed little in centuries. Here lies the village of Woolpit, its name derived from ancient wolf pits once dug to capture predators that threatened livestock. Today, it is a quiet place. Yet, nearly 1,000 years ago, it was the stage for one of the most puzzling accounts in all of medieval England, a story that has baffled chroniclers, folklorists, and historians alike. The appearance of the Green Children of Woolpit. The earliest versions of the tale come to us from two respected 12th century writers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, both of whom were careful, even in their time, to separate rumor from record. Their accounts agree on the essentials. During the reign of King Stephen or King Henry II, villagers in Woolpit discovered two children, a boy and a girl, near one of the old wolf pits. They were unlike any others seen before. Their clothing was made of unfamiliar material, their speech was in a language no one understood, and their skin was green. At first, the children would eat nothing but raw beans, refusing all other food. Over time, they learned to eat bread and other fare, and their green hue began to fade. The boy, however, became ill and died soon after baptism. The girl survived, growing to adulthood and reportedly adapting to her new life in England. In some versions, she learned enough of the local language to explain their origins. She claimed they came from a place without sunlight, where light was perpetual twilight, and all the inhabitants were green-skinned like themselves. What could explain such a story? Theories abound, each attempting to ground the account in the realities of the medieval world. Some historians suggest that the children may have been Flemish immigrants or orphans, displaced by conflict and unfamiliar with English language and custom. Their green appearance could have been the result of malnutrition, specifically green sickness, or hypochromic anemia, which can give the skin a greenish tint. In this view, their strange clothing and language were simply foreign, their odd diet born of necessity and habit. But even these rational explanations leave gaps. Why would two young children be found alone, far from any known settlement, apparently disoriented and unable to recognize the sunlit world around them? The girl's account of an underground or twilight land, separated from ours by a river or chasm, is harder to reconcile with ordinary migration. Could this have been a child's confused memory, shaped by trauma and retold in metaphor? Or might it hint at something more unusual, perhaps a folk memory of hidden communities living apart from the medieval mainstream? Folklorists have long noted parallels between the Woolpit story and older European myths, tales of the fair folk, of beings from a parallel realm who occasionally emerge into the human world. The green skin, the strange language, the reluctance to eat human food. These are motifs found in Celtic and Anglo-Saxon lore alike. Could the chroniclers, steeped in such traditions, have interpreted an unusual but natural event through the lens of legend? Then there are those who push the boundaries of speculation even further. In modern times, some have drawn comparisons to theories of otherworldly visitors, interpreting the Twilight Land as a poetic description of another planet, or the children as survivors of some unknown catastrophe. These ideas, while far from mainstream, speak to the enduring power of the mystery. The details are just strange enough to invite endless reinterpretation. Woolpit itself offers no definitive answers. The village green is quiet, the church still stands, and the surrounding fields roll gently to the horizon. Somewhere beneath the plow soil, traces of the medieval settlement remain, the same land that once sustained the villagers who first saw the strange pair emerge. Local tradition keeps the story alive. Visitors still come, drawn by the idea that in this peaceful Suffolk parish, two children from somewhere utterly unlike our own world once walked. In the absence of conclusive evidence, the green children of Woolpit remain suspended between history and folklore. The chroniclers who recorded their story wrote with sincerity, yet they could not fully explain what they had heard. Theories grounded in medicine, migration, and myth all touch parts of the truth, but none fit perfectly. And perhaps that is why the story persists. It resists the neat closure of historical certainty. Were the green children merely lost wanderers, their appearance and manner the product of deprivation and difference? Or did they truly come from some hidden, half-lit world, slipping into ours only for a moment before vanishing back into the long memory of legend? Whatever the answer, the fields of Woolpit still hold their silence, and the mystery remains, as green and as strange as when it first began. From the strange appearance of the green children in the quiet fields of Suffolk, we turn now to a mystery that lies not in the realm of folklore, but in the silent void left by history itself. A vanishing not of people, but of words. Somewhere between the candlelit chambers of a medieval scriptorium and the centuries that followed, the written works of the chronicler John Balliol slipped from sight, leaving behind not even a fragment to confirm their final fate. The name Balliol is perhaps best remembered for the Scottish king of the late 13th century, but this John Balliol was a figure of scholarship rather than sovereignty, an English chronicler whose work, if it had survived, might have offered a rare and invaluable perspective on the turbulent years of his age. His manuscripts were said to have contained detailed accounts of political affairs, monastic life, and even lesser-known events at the edges of recorded history. Such chronicles were not merely records. They were the threads by which later generations could weave together the truth of their past. Picture the scriptorium in which Balliol worked, a narrow, high-ceilinged room within the stone walls of a priory or university hall, its air thick with the smell of vellum and oak gall ink. Light from tall, arched windows falls in sharp angles across the wooden desks, where parchment lies smoothed beneath weights, and quills scratch steadily as the hours pass. In this world of painstaking craft, a single manuscript might take months, sometimes years, to complete. Each volume was unique, the product of both intellect and artistry, and its loss would be irreplaceable. The last confirmed references to Balliol's manuscripts come from scattered 14th century inventories, where they appear alongside works of theology and law. After that, the trail fades. Some historians believe they may have been housed for a time in the libraries of Oxford or Durham, both centers of learning with ties to the Balliol family. But by the time catalogues were modernized in the early modern period, the works are gone. No copies, no citations, no surviving excerpts. How does such a disappearance happen? There are practical explanations. Medieval manuscripts were always at risk. Fires could consume entire libraries in a single night. Damp could rot parchment beyond saving. War and civil unrest might scatter collections. The dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII destroyed untold volumes of medieval learning as religious houses were dismantled and their libraries broken apart. Could Balliol's manuscripts have been among those destroyed or discarded during this upheaval? There is also the quieter, less dramatic erosion of time. A work not widely copied, or not deemed of high enough theological or political importance, could simply be neglected. Stored in a chest, forgotten in an unused chamber, and eventually broken down for its materials. Vellum scraped and reused, bindings dismantled for their leather and clasps. In an age when every sheet of parchment was precious, no text was entirely safe. Yet, some scholars sense a more deliberate hand in this disappearance. Balliol's chronicles reportedly touched on events and figures whose reputations were contested, perhaps even dangerous to challenge openly. If his accounts contradicted the accepted royal or ecclesiastical narrative, could they have been suppressed? The political climate of medieval England was not kind to dissenting voices. Chronicles could be rewritten, altered, or quietly removed from circulation if they proved inconvenient to those in power. More speculative theories stretch further. Some suggest that Balliol's works might have been spirited away during times of political upheaval, hidden in private collections, perhaps even sent abroad for safekeeping. In this scenario, the manuscripts might still exist, locked in the archives of an old family estate or tucked away in a European library, their significance unrecognized by modern catalogers. It is not impossible. Discoveries of long-lost medieval texts still occur from time to time, pulled from dusty shelves or uncovered during renovations. But if Balliol's manuscripts do survive somewhere, what might they contain that would be worth such concealment? Would they offer mundane details of monastic accounts and local disputes? Or would they open new perspectives on the wars, treaties, and intrigues of the 13th and 14th centuries? Might they even challenge the way we understand certain turning points of medieval history? The absence of these works is more than a loss of specific stories. It is a gap in the tapestry of England's historical record. Chroniclers like Balliol were not merely passive recorders, they were interpreters, shaping the way events were remembered. Without his voice, we are left with a chorus missing one of its singers, the harmonies of the past forever altered. Today, the archives of Oxford, Durham, and other ancient repositories still hold volumes from Balliol's time, their pages dense with the script of careful hands long vanished. But among the bindings and brittle folios, there is no sign of the works that bore his name. It is a silence that speaks not in words, but in the unanswered question of how and why they were lost. Was the disappearance of John Balliol's manuscripts the result of fire, damp, and neglect? The slow, impersonal destruction that claimed so many medieval works? Or were they deliberately removed, their contents judged too dangerous or controversial for posterity? Until such a volume emerges from an overlooked shelf or a private trove, the mystery remains sealed, and we are left to wonder what truths or what stories might still lie hidden, waiting for the right eyes to find them. From the silent absence of John Balliol's manuscripts, our path leads us to a mystery set not in the quiet chambers of a scriptorium, but on the blood-soaked slopes of a battlefield, one that marked the end of Anglo-Saxon England and the dawn of Norman rule. The windswept ridge of Senlac Hill near Hastings in Sussex still holds the weight of history. Here, on 14 October 1066, King Harold Godwinson met his fate in one of the most famous clashes ever fought on English soil. Or so the chronicles tell us. The Bayeux Tapestry, that long and vivid embroidery of conquest, depicts a scene that has shaped centuries of imagination. Harold, struck in the eye by an arrow, falling beneath Norman swords. Yet even this iconic image raises questions. The tapestry's Latin inscription above the dying king reads, "Harold is killed," but does not clearly confirm the arrow as the cause. Some scholars suggest the figure pierced by the arrow and the figure hacked down by Norman knights might not even be the same man. Which is the true Harold? If either. And if the records can't agree on how he died, what of the far murkier question of what happened to his body afterward? The official Norman account states that William the Conqueror allowed Harold's mother, Githa, to collect her son's remains for burial, but only after paying a ransom, an account contradicted by other sources claiming William refused her pleas. According to some chroniclers, Harold's body was so badly mutilated in the battle that it could only be identified by a distinctive mark known to his common-law wife, Edith Swanwick. Others claim his corpse was buried in an unmarked grave on the battlefield itself, William denying him a Christian burial as a usurper. Byland Abbey, founded by William on the very site of the fight, is sometimes said to have been Harold's final resting place, beneath the high altar, as a grim concession to the fallen king's status. Yet no archaeological excavation has revealed any trace of such a grave. If Harold was indeed interred here, his remains may have been disturbed or lost during later centuries, when the abbey was dissolved and its buildings dismantled. And then, there are the stranger possibilities. A handful of later traditions claim Harold did not die at Hastings at all. According to these tales, he survived the battle, grievously wounded, and was taken into hiding, either in England or in a far-off monastery. One 12th century account tells of a hermit living at Chester, who was said to be Harold himself, living out his days in penitence. These stories, while romantic, stand on fragile historical ground. Yet they remind us how quickly uncertainty can fill the gaps left by incomplete records. Even the location of Harold's grave remains a matter of dispute. Beyond Byland Abbey, there are claims that his body was carried to Waltham Abbey in Essex, an institution he had richly endowed before becoming king. Here, a simple stone in the churchyard still bears the inscription, "Here lies Harold, last Saxon King of England." But no burial chamber beneath it has been conclusively linked to him, and the stone itself is of much later date. Was this marker placed over an authentic but long-forgotten grave, or is it a symbolic memorial to a king whose true resting place is unknown? Archaeological efforts to find Harold's remains have been limited and controversial. The possibility of excavation at Waltham Abbey has been raised multiple times, but such work is sensitive, both politically and religiously. Without scientific analysis, the claim remains unverified, the stone an emblem of unresolved history. Speculation has also turned to the possibility that Harold's body was buried secretly to prevent it from being desecrated. In the chaos following the battle, loyal retainers might have spirited it away under cover of darkness, interring it in some unmarked location known only to a few. If so, the knowledge of his resting place may have died with them, leaving posterity to chase shadows. The death of Harold Godwinson is more than the passing of a single man. It is the point at which one England ended and another began. That such a pivotal figure could vanish into uncertainty speaks to the fragility of medieval record-keeping, but also to the way political necessity shapes what is remembered and what is left unsaid. Did William seek to obscure the fate of his rival for symbolic dominance? Or did Harold's own supporters, in death as in life, shield him from Norman control in the only way left to them? Standing on the ridge at Battle today, the wind cutting across the open field, the landscape feels at once serene and haunted. The earth beneath is rich farmland now, yet it holds the echoes of that day. Shouts in Old English and Norman French, the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel. Somewhere here, or perhaps far from here, lie the remains of the man who was England's last crowned king before the Norman conquest. Was Harold Godwinson struck down by an arrow, or cut down in the melee? Was his body buried with honor beneath an abbey altar, laid to rest in his own foundation at Waltham, or hidden forever in an unmarked grave? Until the earth gives up its secrets, his final moments and final resting place will remain a question. One more piece of England's past suspended between legend and truth, waiting for an answer that may never come. From the windswept ridge at Battle, where the fate of Harold Godwinson remains shrouded in uncertainty, our journey moves into an even more elusive realm, one where faith, wealth, and secrecy intertwine. Across England's countryside stand the weathered remains of round churches, fortified preceptories, and ancient farmsteads, once under the command of a brotherhood whose power spanned continents, the Knights Templar. Their name still evokes images of warrior monks clad in white mantles marked with a red cross, riding into battle in the Crusades. But here, far from the deserts of the Holy Land, their story carries another shadow, the enduring question of what became of the Templar treasure, and whether part of it still lies hidden somewhere in England. In the early 14th century, the Templars were among the wealthiest and most influential orders in Christendom. Their holdings in England alone included vast estates, manor houses, mills, and commanderies, self-sufficient centers that produced revenue to support their operations abroad. From London to Lincolnshire, from Somerset to Northumberland, their network was as much financial as it was military. The order's role as bankers to kings, nobles, and merchants meant they handled vast sums in coin, gold, and silver. By the time King Philip IV of France moved to destroy them in 1307, accusing them of heresy and corruption, the Templars were rumored to control riches beyond imagining, treasures gathered over 2 centuries of warfare, trade, and pilgrimage. In France, the mass arrests of October 1307 were swift and brutal, but in England, the process unfolded more slowly. King Edward II initially hesitated to move against the order, and many Templar properties remained in their hands for months after their brethren on the continent had been seized. This delay has fueled one of the central theories surrounding the Templar treasure in England, that the order had time to conceal or move their wealth before the crown could confiscate it. Some historians suggest that the treasure, if it existed in a form beyond ordinary assets, was spirited away from major centers like the Temple in London. The Temple Church, with its distinctive round nave modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was both a religious space and an administrative hub. Beneath its stone floors, a network of vaults and storerooms would have provided secure storage for valuables. Official records show that when royal agents eventually seized the property, they inventoried a modest list of goods, hardly the trove that legend promises. Was the treasure gone by then, moved to lesser-known estates, or hidden in locations never officially linked to the order? Local traditions across England claim that Templar gold lies buried in remote places. In Hertfordshire, stories tell of carts laden with chests traveling by night from the temple in London to a preceptory in the countryside, never to be seen again. In Yorkshire, a field known as Temple Hill is said to conceal a subterranean chamber filled with chests, guarded by a curse. In Cornwall, old tales speak of tunnels running beneath chapels where the Templars once held sway, their entrances collapsed or deliberately sealed. The contents of this supposed treasure are as debated as its location. Was it simply gold and silver, currency that could be melted down or spent discreetly? Or did it include relics, documents, and sacred objects of immense symbolic value? More speculative theories suggest the Templars may have safeguarded artifacts brought from the Holy Land, objects such as the True Cross, the Ark of the Covenant, or even the Holy Grail itself. While mainstream historians caution that such claims rest on tenuous evidence, the persistence of these ideas speaks to the aura of mystery that surrounds the order. Records from the dissolution of the Templar estates in England show that their properties were eventually handed over to the Knights Hospitaller, but here too, gaps remain. Some inventories are incomplete, others suspiciously vague. Was this due to poor record-keeping or deliberate omission? Could sympathetic officials have turned a blind eye to the quiet transfer of certain assets before the Hospitallers took possession? Archaeological investigation has uncovered fragments of the Templar world, seals bearing their insignia, coins minted in their territories, foundations of their churches and halls. Yet nothing definitively linked to a vast hidden hoard has ever been found. The lack of discovery might suggest the treasure was a myth from the start, or it might point to a concealment so thorough that even 7 centuries have not been enough to uncover it. The countryside where these mysteries linger is often deceptively peaceful. A ruined chapel half hidden by ivy, its stones warmed by the afternoon sun. A hilltop where the wind moves through tall grass, carrying with it the faint toll of a distant church bell. A deep, brackish pond in the corner of a field, said by locals to be bottomless, where, they whisper, the Templars cast their treasure to keep it from their enemies. If there is truth in these stories, it remains locked away, perhaps in the earth itself, perhaps in the attics of forgotten manor houses, or in the private vaults of institutions that choose not to reveal what they hold. And if the treasure was not simply gold, but knowledge, charters, maps, secret alliances, its value might be as much in the ideas it contains as in its material worth. The fate of the Knights Templar treasure in England remains one of those mysteries that seems to resist closure. Was it seized and quietly absorbed into royal coffers, leaving no trace? Was it scattered in small parcels to loyal supporters, its memory magnified by rumor? Or does it still rest somewhere, undisturbed, waiting for the moment when earth, stone, and secrecy give way to discovery? Until then, it lies in that uneasy space between history and legend, its reality uncertain, its allure undimmed. From the shadowy legends of the Knights Templar's hidden wealth, our path leads east to Essex, where the ancient Roman walls of Colchester still stand, weathered but resolute. Within these stone boundaries, England's oldest recorded town has seen sieges, fires, plagues, and parades. But in the early 14th century, it witnessed something stranger still, an episode so unusual that chroniclers struggled to describe it, and whose causes remain shrouded in uncertainty. This was the so-called Dancing Plague of Colchester. The setting is a market square, perhaps much like it still is today. Timber-framed houses leaning inward, cobbled streets alive with the bustle of traders and townsfolk. But on that day, the usual murmur of barter and gossip would have been overtaken by a sound stranger and more insistent, the rhythmic scuff of feet, the clap of hands and voices, some singing, some crying out, rising and falling in feverish repetition. A crowd had formed, not in celebration, but in compulsion. Men and women alike were moving without rest, swaying, leaping, stamping in patterns that seemed both frantic and strangely coordinated, as if driven by music no one else could hear. This was no festival. According to the scant surviving accounts, the dancers could not stop, even as exhaustion took its toll. Some collapsed, only to rise again moments later. Others were carried away, still trembling, their limbs twitching as if under invisible strings. Witnesses spoke of expressions that shifted from joy to anguish in moments, and of participants who claimed to feel as if they were being pulled along by a force outside themselves. While the dancing plague is most famously associated with events on the continent, particularly the outbreaks along the Rhine in the late Middle Ages, Colchester's case stands as one of the few recorded in England. It unfolded during a period when the town was still recovering from political unrest and famine, conditions that left its population weary and vulnerable. What could cause such a phenomenon? The most widely accepted explanations among historians and medical scholars fall into two broad categories: physiological and psychological. On the physiological side, some suggest ergot poisoning, caused by a fungus that infects rye and other grains in damp conditions. Consuming bread made from such contaminated flour can trigger convulsions, hallucinations, and involuntary movements. But ergotism typically also causes severe physical pain and gangrene, symptoms not mentioned in the Colchester reports. Others propose mass hysteria, or what modern medicine calls mass psychogenic illness, a response to extreme stress in which physical symptoms spread rapidly through a community without an identifiable organic cause. In the context of medieval life, where famine, disease, and fear of divine punishment were constant companions, it is possible that the outbreak in Colchester was triggered by a shared psychological state, magnified by religious fervor and the tension of recent hardships. Yet there are details that neither theory explains fully. Why dancing? Why the rhythmic, almost ritualistic nature of the movements, as opposed to random convulsions? Could the outbreak have been linked to an actual dance, perhaps a penitential procession gone awry, which spiraled into something uncontrolled? Or might it have been tied to local superstition, an attempt to ward off misfortune through continuous motion, only for the act itself to consume its participants? More speculative theories have emerged over time. Some folklorists see echoes of older, pre-Christian traditions, in which communal dancing was linked to seasonal cycles, fertility rites, or even appeasing spirits. If such practices lingered beneath the surface of medieval Christianity, perhaps this plague was the resurfacing of something older, misunderstood, or deliberately reinterpreted by the chroniclers. Then there are the darker suggestions, whispers of curses or divine punishment. In an age when unusual events were often framed in moral or spiritual terms, some contemporaries may have seen the outbreak as a sign of God's wrath or the work of malign forces. Without the language of modern science, the line between the supernatural and the pathological was thin, and the spectacle of dozens moving in relentless, unison-like chaos could easily be read as possession or enchantment. As with so many medieval mysteries, the records are frustratingly incomplete. We know neither how long the outbreak lasted nor how many were affected. We do not know whether it ended abruptly, as some continental cases did, or faded away as participants succumbed to exhaustion. No medical reports survive, only fragments from civic documents and the occasional passing mention in chronicles concerned with other matters. Today, Colchester's streets are busy with modern life, cafes, traffic, the hum of conversation. But here and there, the old Roman walls break the surface, a reminder of how much has passed within this place. Stand near the market on a quiet morning, and it is not hard to imagine the square as it was. The clatter of hooves, the cries of hawkers, and somewhere in the midst of it, a circle of dancers moving without pause, their feet wearing the cobblestones smooth. Was the dancing plague of Colchester the result of poisoned bread, collective stress, and belief-shaping behavior? Or was it something far stranger, a fleeting eruption of ritual, belief, or force that defies easy classification? Whatever its origin, the event has left no physical trace, only the shadow of a story that continues to puzzle and provoke. And so the question lingers. In that strange outbreak of movement and musicless rhythm, were the people of Colchester victims of their bodies, of their minds, or of something that still lies beyond our understanding? From the restless steps of Colchester's mysterious dancers, our path winds westward into Somerset, where the mist clings low over rolling hills, and the silhouette of Glastonbury Tor rises above the landscape like a watchful sentinel. At its base lie the ruins of Glastonbury Abbey, once one of the wealthiest and most influential monastic sites in England, a place where history, legend, and sacred tradition are so tightly interwoven that it is often difficult to tell where fact ends and myth begins. It was here, in 1191, that monks claimed to have unearthed a discovery unlike any other, a grave containing a lead cross, bearing an inscription that would ignite centuries of speculation. The cross was said to have been found between two tall, hollowed oak coffins deep in the earth. On it, in Latin, was engraved, Hic jacet sepultus, inclitus rex Arturius, in Insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur, in the Isle of Avalon. For the monks of Glastonbury, the timing of the discovery was fortuitous, if not suspicious. Just years earlier, a devastating fire had destroyed much of the abbey, leaving it in desperate need of funds for rebuilding. News that the legendary King Arthur, hero of Britain's mythic past, had been found within their grounds drew pilgrims, donations, and attention from across the realm. Descriptions of the cross vary between contemporary and later accounts. Some chroniclers, like Gerald of Wales, recorded the find with remarkable detail, claiming to have seen the cross himself. He described it as a thick, dark piece of lead, inscribed on both sides in a mixture of capital and lowercase letters, a curious style for the period it was supposed to represent. According to Gerald, the cross lay face down, protecting its inscription from the soil, as though placed with deliberate care to preserve its message for future discoverers. Yet even in its own time, questions arose. Why would a 6th century burial, if indeed it was Arthur's, contain a lead cross in a style and script more typical of the 10th or 11th century? Was this truly an ancient relic or a clever medieval forgery designed to link Glastonbury to the most enduring legend in British lore? The mainstream historical view tends toward skepticism. The monks, struggling financially after the fire, had every incentive to produce a discovery that would attract pilgrims. The lead cross, with its tantalizing inscription, provided physical proof of Glastonbury's claim to be Avalon itself, the mystical resting place of Arthur as told in the romances. And in a medieval world where relics and legendary associations could transform a site's fortunes, such a find would have been invaluable. Still, there are elements of the discovery that resist easy dismissal. The grave was reportedly situated between two ancient stone pyramids in the abbey grounds, structures whose origins were already obscure in the 12th century. The depth of the burial and the unusual construction of the coffins, made from hollowed oak trunks, suggested considerable antiquity. Could it be that the monks embellished a genuine ancient burial, adding the cross and its inscription to fit their narrative? More speculative theories abound. Some writers have suggested that the cross may have been created centuries earlier than the discovery, perhaps as a marker for a burial long venerated by local tradition. Others wonder if the inscription's peculiar mix of letter forms might reflect an attempt to replicate an older style by someone who had only imperfect knowledge of it, a blend of authentic memory and later reconstruction. The fate of the lead cross itself adds another layer to the mystery. By the dissolution of Glastonbury Abbey under Henry VIII in the 16th century, the cross had vanished. No confirmed sketches or rubbings survive, leaving modern scholars dependent on medieval descriptions. Was it melted down for its material value during the seizure of monastic treasures? Or did it disappear earlier, perhaps spirited away into a private collection by someone who doubted, or knew, the truth of its origin? Today, the supposed site of Arthur's grave is marked within the abbey ruins, a grassy rectangle enclosed by low stones. Visitors walk past it daily, some pausing to read the plaque, others lingering longer, as though hoping to sense something of the past through the quiet air. The Tor rises in the distance, shrouded in the same mist that once fed tales of Avalon's hidden isle. If the lead cross was genuine, then it could represent one of the most significant archaeological finds in English history, tangible evidence linking the historical record to one of Britain's most enduring legends. If it was a fabrication, it stands instead as a testament to the medieval interplay between faith, economy, and the power of story. And so the riddle remains. Was the cross a lost relic of a bygone king placed in the earth by hands that remembered his name? Or was it the creation of desperate monks wielding legend as a tool to rebuild stone and faith alike? Without the cross itself, the answer lies buried, perhaps forever, beneath the layered soil of Glastonbury, where history and myth continue to walk side by side. From the mists of Glastonbury and the enigma of the lead cross, our journey moves north and east into the low-lying wetlands of the fens, where reed beds sway in the wind and water glimmers between endless channels. It is a land both open and concealed, where horizons seem far, yet danger can be hidden just a few steps away. Here, in the years following the Norman conquest, the marshes became the last stronghold of a man who defied England's new rulers. His name was Hereward, known to history and to legend as the Wake. The fens of the 11th century were a treacherous place for outsiders, but for those who knew the hidden causeways, the shifting channels, and the safe islands amid the wetlands, they were a fortress. Hereward, a dispossessed Anglo-Saxon noble, made this landscape his base, rallying men to resist the Normans in a campaign of ambushes, raids, and sudden disappearances. Monastic chronicles tell us that he fought not only for his own lands, but in defense of the ancient liberties of the English. His most famous stand took place at Ely in 1071, when the Isle, still surrounded then by impassable marsh, became the final bastion of organized resistance against William the Conqueror. The fall of Ely is recorded in multiple sources, though their details diverge. Some say the Normans, aided by a trader, built a causeway of timber and brush to cross the marshes. Others claim they used ships to reach the island. Whatever the method, the fortress fell, and many rebels were captured or killed. Hereward, however, escaped, slipping away into the mists and reeds as the Norman forces closed in, and from that moment, the story becomes uncertain. One account, preserved in the Gesta Herewardi, a romanticized chronicle compiled decades after the events, claims that Hereward continued his resistance for several years, striking at Norman garrisons and avoiding capture through cunning disguises and the loyalty of his followers. In this version, he eventually made peace with William, swearing fealty and living out his days quietly on his remaining lands. Other chronicles tell a darker tale, that Hereward was killed not long after Ely fell, ambushed by Norman knights while traveling with a small band of men. The fight, they say, was fierce, Hereward cutting down several attackers before he was overwhelmed. Some place his burial at Byland Abbey, though no grave with his name has ever been found. And then there are the more fragmentary, tantalizing hints. A passing reference in one medieval text suggests that Hereward may have gone into exile, perhaps joining the court of a foreign ruler. Denmark is sometimes mentioned, owing to the earlier alliance between Ely's defenders and Danish forces. Could the Wake have died in another land, far from the marshes he knew so well? Or was this simply a poetic flourish, a way for chroniclers to give the outlaw a more fittingly open-ended fate? Over the centuries, the figure of Hereward grew in legend. In later retellings, he became almost a folk hero, a Robin Hood before Robin Hood, outwitting the Normans, rescuing prisoners, even taking on impossible odds in single combat. The line between historical fact and literary invention blurred, and in that haze, the question of his true end became even harder to answer. Historians have tried to sift the legend from the record. The Gesta Herewardi appears to draw on genuine oral traditions, yet its later sections bear the hallmarks of embellishment. Domesday Book entries hint at properties once linked to Hereward, but they shed no light on his final years. Monastic annals occasionally reference his name, but with little context, sometimes in a prayer, sometimes in passing. None resolve the mystery. The landscape itself offers no clues. The medieval marshes have long since been drained, the fenland now crisscrossed by straight canals and rich farmland. The Isle of Ely, once isolated, is part of the mainland. Byland Abbey lies in partial ruin, its surviving stonework weathered by centuries. If Hereward's grave was here, time and the shifting priorities of the church have erased all visible trace. And yet, the uncertainty only deepens his legacy. Was Hereward a doomed but unbroken champion who died in battle against the conquerors? A pragmatic survivor who made his peace and faded into obscurity? Or did he vanish beyond England's shores, his story kept alive only by those who dreamed of resistance? The mists of the fens have long since lifted, but the truth about Hereward the Wake remains hidden, whether beneath the quiet stones of a forgotten grave, in a document yet undiscovered, or in the unrecorded memories of a people who needed their hero to live on. And so we are left to wonder, was his end as fierce as his life, or as elusive as the marshland shadows that once sheltered him? From the watery mists of the fens and the uncertain fate of Hereward the Wake, our journey moves into the heart of England, into the gentle undulations of Staffordshire, where farmland stretches under wide skies and the hedgerows mark quiet, winding lanes. It was here, in 2009, that a discovery was made beneath an unremarkable field. A discovery that would shake our understanding of the Anglo-Saxon past and leave historians with questions still unanswered. This was the Staffordshire Hoard. At first glance, the hoard is a dazzling spectacle. Over 3,500 individual items, many of them fashioned from gold and silver, inlaid with garnets of deep crimson and glass the color of honey. Sword pommels glint with intricate knotwork. Helmet fragments bear the stern faces of warriors, and crosses, some bent and folded, hint at both Christian devotion and deliberate desecration. The craftsmanship is breathtaking, every detail wrought by hands that understood not only beauty, but symbolism and power. The hoard's dating, based on stylistic and scientific analysis, places it in the 6th to 8th centuries, a period when the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England were often in fierce rivalry. The sheer quality of the pieces suggests elite ownership, perhaps royal. Many are clearly martial, fittings from swords, hilts, scabbards, and helmet plates. These were not the belongings of common soldiers, but of warriors and leaders of the highest rank. Yet the nature of the hoard is curious. Unlike many famous archaeological treasures, it contains no coins, no jewelry for personal adornment, only items connected to war and to faith. This narrow focus raises the first great question. Was this a royal treasury hidden in haste? Spoils of war, stripped from fallen enemies, or a ritual deposit, buried for reasons that are now lost to us? The location offers few clues. The field where the hoard was found lies in what was once the Kingdom of Mercia, one of the most powerful realms of Anglo-Saxon England. In its prime, Mercia was ruled by kings such as Penda, Offa, and Ethelbald, men known for both their military might and their political ambition. Could the hoard have been part of the spoils from Mercia's wars against its neighbors, Northumbria, Wessex, or East Anglia? If so, who buried it, and why was it never retrieved? One theory suggests the hoard was hidden during a time of crisis, perhaps the sudden death of a ruler, or a shift in the balance of power that made it too dangerous to reclaim. Another posits that it was an offering to God, given in thanks or in desperate petition before a great battle. The bent and twisted crosses could be evidence of this, a symbolic killing of sacred objects before they were consigned to the earth. There are also more speculative ideas. Some scholars have suggested the hoard might represent a royal armory dismantled in an act of political cleansing, stripping the regalia and weapons of a defeated enemy and erasing their identity by breaking them down into fragments. Others wonder whether the hoard might have been intended for reworking, valuable materials stored until they could be melted and refashioned into new objects, their original owners forgotten. The mystery deepens when we consider the garnets. Many appear to have come from as far away as Sri Lanka or India, traveling through complex trade networks that stretched across Europe and beyond. This suggests that the hoard's makers had access to materials from the farthest reaches of the known world. Yet the objects themselves were buried in a quiet corner of Mercia. How did these riches come to rest here, far from the great coastal ports and trading centers? Even the manner of burial raises questions. The items were not carefully arranged, but heaped together as if poured into the ground. Some were broken, others pristine. It was a deposit made quickly, without ceremony, or at least without a ceremony that left visible trace. Was this urgency born of danger or of deliberate secrecy? Since its discovery, the hoard has been meticulously cleaned, studied, and displayed, yet no single theory has emerged to explain it fully. Chemical analysis can tell us where the gold was refined. Microscopy can reveal the techniques of the craftsman. Comparative studies can link motifs to other known objects. But none of these tools can tell us the thoughts of the person who chose to bury this extraordinary collection, and never returned. Today, parts of the hoard are housed in museums, their surfaces gleaming under carefully controlled lights. Visitors peer into glass cases, tracing the patterns with their eyes, wondering at the lives of those who once held these objects. Outside, in the fields of Staffordshire, the wind moves through the grass much as it must have done on the day the hoard was hidden, when someone, for reasons we may never fully know, consigned a fortune in gold, silver, and garnet to the earth. Was the Staffordshire hoard a king's ransom in waiting, a warrior's triumph over his enemies, or an offering meant to secure divine favor? Or was it something stranger still, a deliberate act of concealment meant not to preserve, but to remove these treasures from the world entirely? Until the story of its burial comes to light, the hoard remains not just a window into the Anglo-Saxon past, but a mirror reflecting our enduring fascination with what is hidden and why. From the buried splendor of the Staffordshire hoard, our journey turns westward toward the jagged, wave-battered coastline of Cornwall. Here, the land falls away into sheer cliffs and hidden coves, where the Atlantic pounds against black rock and the wind carries the tang of salt and the whisper of ancient legends. It is a coast that has claimed countless ships, some remembered in detail, others swallowed entirely by the sea. And yet, over the centuries, there have been reports of vessels seen where none should be, silent, spectral forms gliding over the water before vanishing without a trace. The waters off Cornwall are notoriously dangerous. Treacherous reefs and shifting sandbanks lurk just beneath the surface, and sudden storms can whip up swells that shatter even the sturdiest hulls. Mariners here have long relied on lighthouses, St. Anthony's Head, the Longships, the Lizard, to guide them safely to shore. Yet even these beacons cannot explain the sightings recorded in parish records, lighthouse logs, and the diaries of sailors. Descriptions of the ghost ships vary. Some accounts speak of great medieval cogs or caravels, their high prows and square sails silhouetted against the setting sun, rigging hanging slack in the windless air. Others describe more modern forms, three-masted barks or brigs, their decks oddly deserted, no crew visible on watch. Witnesses say these ships move steadily, sometimes against the prevailing wind, before fading into sea mist or vanishing outright when approached. In certain stories, they appear moments before a sudden squall or shipwreck, leading some to see them as omens rather than mere apparitions. Historically, Cornwall's coast has been the stage for both tragedy and cunning. Shipwrecks were common, and in darker times, so too were the practices of wrecking, luring vessels to their doom to salvage their cargo. It is tempting to think that some of these ghost ship sightings might have been misidentified real vessels, glimpsed through fog or rain at a distance, their forms distorted by weather and imagination. But several reports come from experienced sailors and lighthouse keepers, people accustomed to reading the sea, who swore they saw ships that could not have been there. Some historians suggest the phenomenon might be the result of a fata morgana, an atmospheric mirage caused by layers of warm and cold air over the water. These can magnify and distort distant ships, making them appear to hover above the waves or sail in impossible directions. Such illusions have been recorded in other parts of the world, and Cornwall's volatile maritime climate could certainly produce them. But others point out details that do not fit the mirage theory. In some sightings, the ghost ship is described as passing within hailing distance, close enough for the witness to see weathered planks, tattered banners, or strange carvings on the hull. A mirage could not bring such a vessel so near, nor could it explain reports of these ships moving through shallows where the charts show no safe passage, leaving no wake behind. Folklore, too, has its place in the story. Cornwall's maritime legends are rich with tales of cursed crews, phantom galleons bound to sail forever, and vessels carrying the souls of the dead to their final rest. In some fishing villages, stories persist of the Trevelyan, a ship lost in the 15th century whose pale form is said to appear before storms, its decks lit with an eerie, phosphorescent glow. Others speak of the Lady Lovell, supposedly wrecked on the Goodwin Sands, but, according to legend, sighted every 50 years off the Cornish coast, her tragic fate replaying endlessly across the waves. More speculative theories venture into the realm of the historical unknown. Could some of these sightings be the last echoes of real ships lost without record? Merchant vessels, privateers, or smugglers that vanished without survivors to tell their tale? If so, are we seeing a kind of collective memory, a maritime counterpart to battlefield ghosts? Or are these sightings simply the product of tired eyes, salt haze, and the human mind's tendency to find shape and story in the shifting mist? No physical evidence has ever been recovered to prove the existence of these phantom vessels. Unlike a wreck that can be mapped, dived, and studied, the ghost ships leave nothing behind. No timbers, no cargo, no trace in the sand. Their reality lives only in testimony, carefully written reports, letters to local papers, and oral accounts passed down through families. And while some reports can be dismissed as coincidence or illusion, others linger, stubbornly resisting explanation. Standing on a Cornish headland at dusk, it is easy to see how such mysteries take root. The horizon wavers where sea meets sky. The cries of seabirds carry strangely in the wind, and far out, a shape moves, black against the silver water, until it slips behind a bank of fog and is gone. Was it a real ship? A trick of the light, or something older and stranger? Until one of these ghost ships is approached and found to be flesh and blood timber rather than phantom canvas, the sightings will remain caught between fact and legend, reminders that even in an age of satellite navigation and radar, the sea keeps its secrets. And perhaps that is why the question persists. In the shifting mists off Cornwall, what sails there that should not be? From the shifting mists off Cornwall and the elusive ghost ships that vanish into the horizon, our path turns inland, into the quiet chambers of the nation's archives, where ancient parchment rests under dim light. Here, preserved behind glass and under careful watch, lies one of England's most important historical records, the Domesday Book. Commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1085, it is often described as the most remarkable administrative survey of the medieval world, a meticulous record of land, wealth, and resources across much of the realm. And yet, for all its completeness, one volume is missing, its absence a mystery that has endured for centuries. The Domesday Book as we know it is actually two books. The larger volume, Great Domesday, covers most of England, compiled in a terse, uniform hand. The smaller, Little Domesday, is an even more detailed account of Norfolk, Suffolk, and Essex, written in an earlier stage of the project. But somewhere in the transition from survey to finished compilation, an entire volume, one thought to have recorded the details of certain northern counties, vanished from the historical record. We know it existed because of references in other medieval documents and because the surviving Domesday entries show clear gaps in coverage. Areas such as Cumberland, Westmoreland, Northumberland, and Durham are missing or barely noted, despite being under Norman influence at the time. Whether the volume was ever fully completed or was lost soon after it was written is unclear. How could such a vital part of a king's greatest survey simply disappear? The most straightforward explanation is mundane. The volume may have been destroyed in one of the many fires that swept through royal treasuries and archives in the Middle Ages. The Domesday Book was kept in Winchester for centuries before being moved to Westminster, and medieval storage was rarely kind to parchment. A single accident could have reduced the work to ashes. Yet other possibilities are more intriguing. Some historians suggest that the missing volume may have been deliberately removed or suppressed. The northern counties in 1085 to 1086 were still recovering from the devastation of the Harrying of the North, William's brutal campaign of scorched earth that left whole regions depopulated. Perhaps the survey revealed such ruin or such political sensitivity that the king or his successors chose to keep it from public view. Could the missing book have contained politically dangerous truths about land ownership, losses, or contested claims? Another theory considers the practicalities of the survey. The Domesday commissioners may have struggled to collect accurate data from the north due to unrest, sparse population, or ongoing military concerns. If the northern survey was incomplete or inconsistent, perhaps it was never incorporated into Great Domesday, and the working notes, our missing volume, were eventually discarded. More speculative still are the suggestions that the missing book might not be lost at all, but hidden. Could it have been taken from the royal archives during a time of upheaval, perhaps during the civil wars of Stephen and Matilda in the 12th century, or even later, when monastic libraries and noble estates were dissolved and plundered under Henry VIII? In such periods, valuable or politically sensitive documents sometimes vanished into private hands. If so, might the Northern Domesday still exist in an old chest, its pages forgotten in some country house library? The absence has fueled both academic research and amateur treasure hunts. Archivists have examined medieval inventories, tracing the Domesday Book's custodial history in the hope of spotting clues. Comparisons with other surveys and tax records have allowed partial reconstructions of what the missing data might have contained. But the actual volume, the parchment leaves written by Norman scribes more than 9 centuries ago, remains unseen. Standing before the surviving Domesday volumes in their display cases, one is struck by their density, their compressed script that records, in a few terse lines, the holdings of entire villages and towns. Every manor, every field, every plow team is accounted for, as if the book truly were, as one 12th century writer put it, a final judgment from which there could be no appeal. And yet, for all this sense of authority, the missing volume reminds us that even the most ambitious of medieval records could be incomplete, vulnerable to time, politics, and chance. If it were to be found, what would it tell us? Would it confirm what we suspect, that the North was a land laid waste, its productivity shattered? Or would it reveal details we do not expect? Settlements unrecorded elsewhere, patterns of landholding that challenge our understanding of Norman rule? Could it even contain references to disputes, rebellions, or alliances lost to other histories. The vaults of the National Archives, the libraries of cathedrals, and the private collections of England's oldest families still hold countless medieval documents whose contents remain little known. Somewhere among them, concealed in plain sight or hidden in a place no one has thought to look, might lie the missing Domesday volume. Or perhaps it is truly gone, reduced to ash centuries ago, its knowledge irretrievable. Until its fate is known, the Domesday Book will always have a shadow, an absence where a chapter of England's story should be. And so we are left with the question, is the missing volume simply lost to history, or is it still out there, waiting for the right pair of hands to open it once more? From the mystery of the missing Domesday volume, our path leads to another gap in the historical record, one written not in absent parchment, but in smoke and ash. In the autumn of 1087, London was a growing city of timber houses and narrow lanes, crowned by the imposing silhouette of St. Paul's Cathedral. This was not the domed masterpiece we know today, but an earlier structure, a vast Romanesque church built of stone, dominating the skyline from its perch on Ludgate Hill. It had stood for less than a century when, suddenly and without warning, it was engulfed in flames. The fire that consumed St. Paul's in 1087 is recorded in a few terse lines by medieval chroniclers. They tell us that much of the city burned, and that the cathedral was among the casualties. Yet they do not agree on what sparked the blaze. Some accounts are vague, others entirely silent on its cause. In a city where small fires were common, this was no ordinary accident. The destruction was too swift, too absolute. The cathedral's great timber roof, its carved fittings, and its precious reliquaries were lost. The building's stonework was blackened and cracked, forcing a complete rebuild that would take decades. The most obvious explanation is that the fire was part of a larger urban conflagration. In the late 11th century, London's houses were crowded close together, and most were built of wood with thatched roofs, perfect tinder for a stray spark from a hearth or forge. Once alight, flames could leap from building to building, driven by wind, until they reached even the solid stone of the cathedral. It is easy to imagine the blaze beginning far from Ludgate Hill, advancing unchecked until St. Paul's itself was caught in the inferno. And yet, the timing of the disaster invites questions. The fire occurred in the same year that William the Conqueror died, a moment of political transition and uncertainty. London was a city of mixed loyalties, still adjusting to Norman rule after 2 decades of occupation. Could the burning of the cathedral have been an act of arson, political defiance disguised as urban misfortune? The cathedral was more than a church. It was a seat of ecclesiastical authority and a visible symbol of Norman power in the city. Some have speculated that the fire might have been connected to events within the cathedral itself. St. Paul's housed treasures, gilded reliquaries, jeweled altar pieces, and documents of great value. If thieves sought to cover their tracks, setting a fire might have destroyed both the evidence and the building that held it. The chaotic conditions of medieval firefighting, buckets of water carried by hand, no organized brigade, would have made such a plan devastatingly effective. More speculative theories reach beyond politics or crime into the realm of the symbolic. Fire in medieval thought could be both a tool of God's judgment and a manifestation of the devil's malice. Chroniclers sometimes interpreted the destruction of sacred buildings as a sign of divine displeasure, though they rarely agreed on the reason. Was the burning of St. Paul's read in its time as a warning to the city, a call to repentance, or as proof of hidden sin among the clergy? The lack of moralizing in the surviving accounts is curious in itself. It is almost as if the chroniclers avoided assigning meaning, leaving an uncomfortable silence in place of explanation. The rebuilding that followed was ambitious. Under Bishop Maurice, St. Paul's was reconstructed on an even grander scale, with a stone choir and a vast nave intended to impress both worshippers and visiting dignitaries. Yet the shadow of the fire lingered. No clear record was ever made of its cause, no inquiry recorded in the civic rolls. The event passed into history as an accepted calamity, one that people could name but not explain. Today, standing on Ludgate Hill, the St. Paul's of 1087 is long gone, replaced first by its medieval successor, and later by Sir Christopher Wren's domed cathedral after the Great Fire of London in 1666. No trace of the original burned structure remains above ground. The only witnesses are the brief, fragmentary accounts in monastic chronicles, each offering a few words where we long for pages. Could an archaeological investigation of the site, beneath the modern crypts and foundations, reveal evidence of the fire's origin? Charred timbers, traces of accelerants, or patterns of heat damage might still lie buried. But in a city as ancient and continuously occupied as London, such evidence may already be lost, overwritten by centuries of rebuilding. And so, the questions remain. Was the fire at St. Paul's in 1087 an accident born of crowded streets and open flames? Or was it a deliberate act? Political sabotage, calculated theft, or even a symbolic strike against Norman authority? Did the people of London at the time know more than the records reveal, their silence preserved by the passing centuries? Until a forgotten document comes to light, or the earth itself yields an answer, the blaze that consumed St. Paul's will remain a mystery, a flicker of flame at the edge of history, impossible to extinguish from the imagination. From the smoke and uncertainty surrounding the fire of St. Paul's in 1087, our path moves to another enigma born in the same era, a mystery not carved in stone or written in ink, but stitched into cloth. The Bayeux Tapestry, stretching nearly 70 meters in length, is one of the most extraordinary surviving artifacts of the Middle Ages. Its vivid, hand-embroidered scenes narrate the events leading to the Norman conquest of England in 1066, from Harold Godwinson's fateful oath to the bloody climax at Hastings. Yet when the story reaches its end, something strange happens. The final scene, simple and abrupt, has puzzled scholars for centuries. The last panels depict fleeing English soldiers, Norman horsemen in pursuit, and a small group of figures making a final stand. Above them, the Latin inscription reads, "Et fuga verterunt Angli," and the English turned in flight. Then, without transition, the tapestry stops. No triumphant coronation of William, no depiction of the new king's rule. Only the chaos of retreat, the press of bodies, and the clash of arms frozen mid-motion. Why end here? For a work so carefully composed, the choice seems deliberate. Some argue the tapestry may be incomplete, that the missing conclusion once included William's victory celebrations or scenes cementing Norman legitimacy. But there is no evidence of such panels ever existing, and the ending as it stands has its own peculiar power, an unresolved moment, more abrupt than conclusive. Could the final scene carry a hidden message? Some historians have pointed to the unusual focus on the English resistance in these last moments. The Norman cavalry may dominate, but the English warriors are shown fighting to the end, their shields raised, their spears still thrusting forward. Is this the embroidery of an artist subtly honoring the vanquished, or of patrons willing to acknowledge the ferocity of their opponents? Others have noted the placement of small, often overlooked details in the borders. In the lower margin, strange beasts, contorted human figures, and scenes of violence echo the chaos above. The margins throughout the tapestry have long been debated. Are they mere decoration, or do they carry symbolic commentary on the main narrative? Near the end, the border imagery grows darker, more frenetic, almost as if it reflects the collapse of order itself, the identity of the tapestry's designer, and the intentions of its patrons only deepen the puzzle. While tradition links the work to Bishop Odo of Bayeux, William's half-brother, we cannot be certain. If Odo commissioned it, the abrupt ending may have served a political purpose, leaving the viewer to contemplate the decisive victory without dwelling on the delicate aftermath of conquest. But if the tapestry had multiple contributors or was influenced by Anglo-Saxon artisans, could the ending have been shaped to leave space for a more ambiguous interpretation of events? Speculative theories have flourished in the absence of definitive answers. Some suggest the ending was meant to evoke the fall of Troy or other classical defeats, casting the English not as rebels crushed by rightful rule, but as tragic heroes undone by fate. Others argue that the abrupt stop reflects the uncertainty of the time. When the tapestry was likely completed, William's grip on England was still consolidating, rebellions simmering in the north and west. Perhaps the ending mirrors the political reality. The conquest was not yet complete, the story not yet over. There is also the tantalizing possibility that the ending conceals coded messages intelligible only to a select audience. Certain patterns in the embroidery, the positioning of figures, the choice of animals in the borders, have been read as references to contemporary events outside the main narrative, or even as commentary on the legitimacy of William's claim. While such interpretations remain speculative, they remind us that medieval art often operated on multiple levels, weaving political meaning into religious or historical imagery. And then there is the simplest, yet most haunting possibility, that the tapestry's abrupt conclusion was intended to evoke a sense of loss. By ending with the flight and slaughter of the English, the work freezes the moment of irreversible change, the instant before an old world vanishes. For contemporary viewers, particularly any of English birth, the absence of a new beginning scene would not be oversight, but a deliberate invitation to reflect on what had been taken. The Bayeux Tapestry survives today in Bayeux, France, remarkably intact for a textile nearly 1,000 years old. Visitors who walk its length often linger at the final panel, drawn by its sudden stillness. The threadwork ends where the story does not, leaving a space into which imagination, grief, or pride might rush. And in that gap lies the enduring mystery. Was this an accident of history, the loss of a final section to time, or the work of hands and minds who intended the conquest story to close not in triumph, but in the ambiguity of a moment caught between victory and ruin? Until more evidence emerges, be it in a rediscovered record, a fragment of cloth, or a clue hidden in plain sight among the tapestry stitches, the last scene will remain one of the most debated moments in medieval visual storytelling. And so we are left to wonder, does the Bayeux Tapestry end where it must, or where someone long ago decided it should? From the final, unfinished stitches of the Bayeux Tapestry, our path shifts forward in time into the heart of medieval London, a city where narrow streets wound between timbered houses, and church bells marked the passing of days. Beneath this bustling surface, however, lies another city entirely, a silent layer of history, sealed in earth and clay. Here rest the plague pits of London, vast communal graves dug in moments of desperate crisis, their precise contents and extent still not fully understood. When the Black Death struck in 1348 to 1349, London was unprepared for the scale of death that followed. Chroniclers speak of bodies piling faster than they could be buried, of priests working until they themselves succumbed, and of graveyards filled beyond capacity. In response, deep trenches were dug outside the city walls, sometimes hastily, sometimes with a measure of care, into which hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the dead were laid. These pits became both a grim necessity and a symbol of a city under siege by something it could not control. Over the centuries, the memory of their exact locations faded. London grew outward, building over the former fields and open ground where plague burials had taken place. Yet the earth did not forget. Archaeological excavations in recent decades, often prompted by construction work, have uncovered human remains in dense, orderly layers. Men, women, and children lying side by side, wrapped in simple shrouds or without covering at all. Some of these finds have been linked with known plague burial sites, such as those near Charterhouse Square or under what is now Aldgate. Others, however, are more enigmatic. Not all appear to date from the well-documented Black Death outbreak. Some seem to belong to later waves of plague in the 14th, 15th, and even 17th centuries. This raises questions about how many such pits existed and whether there are still undiscovered burial grounds hidden beneath London's streets and buildings. Mainstream historical explanations suggest these were simply emergency measures, functional, if grim, responses to overwhelming mortality. Records from the time describe city officials granting land for burial, often in haste, and paying laborers to dig the deep trenches needed to contain the dead and prevent further spread of disease. Yet even here, the accounts are incomplete, leaving gaps where speculation can take root. Some researchers have noted anomalies in certain plague pit excavations. Skeletal remains arranged more neatly than expected for a hurried burial, or signs of repeated use over decades, suggesting the sites may have held special significance. Were some pits deliberately reused as memorial spaces, their locations remembered within local communities long after official records forgot them? Could certain areas have been chosen for symbolic or religious reasons, beyond mere convenience? There are also whispered theories that not all plague pit burials were victims of natural disease. In times of social unrest, famine, or persecution, mass graves could serve a darker purpose. Could some of these pits contain those executed or killed during riots, uprisings, or political purges, later remembered or deliberately misremembered as plague victims to conceal uncomfortable truths? While no direct evidence yet confirms such cases in London, the overlap between times of pestilence and times of instability leaves room for uneasy speculation. Adding to the mystery is the fact that not all pits yield identical evidence of plague infection. Modern forensic analysis, including DNA testing of teeth and bones, has confirmed the presence of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death, in some remains. But in others, the bacterium's DNA is absent, whether due to decay over time or because those individuals died of other causes entirely. Does this suggest that the pits, especially those reused in later centuries, became repositories for the dead from multiple crises, their original plague associations blending with other tragedies in collective memory? Today, the city moves above them, largely unaware. Office towers rise where once trenches yawned open, and commuters walk unknowingly over ground that holds thousands of medieval Londoners. Occasionally, a building project uncovers their resting place, halting work while archaeologists carefully document and remove the remains. The bones are studied, sometimes reinterred, but the larger map of London's plague pits remains incomplete, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Standing in Charterhouse Square, where one of the largest plague pits is believed to lie, it is difficult to reconcile the quiet gardens and shaded benches with the knowledge of what rests below. The grass hides the shape of the earth, and only the imagination can bring back the grim scenes of 1349. The steady toll of carts carrying the dead, the hurried prayers, the thud of earth falling into the trench. Were these pits simply the most efficient solution to an unimaginable crisis? Or do they hold deeper stories of forgotten communities, of crises beyond the plague, of choices made in the shadows of fear and faith? Until the last of them is found and studied, the plague pits of London will remain a buried reminder that beneath the city's modern foundations lies a past still waiting to be fully uncovered. From the silent burial grounds beneath London's streets, where the victims of plague lie in their unmarked trenches, our path leads us far from the city, to the windswept hills and wooded valleys of Shropshire. Here, amid the rolling landscape that straddles the Welsh border, medieval chronicles tell of something that could not be buried or contained. A phenomenon both feared and revered, known as the Wild Hunt. On moonless nights, when the wind cut sharply across the ridges and the branches clattered like bones, people claimed to hear it before they saw it. A distant, growing roar that was neither storm nor stampede. Witnesses spoke of horns sounding in the darkness, the baying of hounds, and the pounding of hooves racing unseen through the air. Sometimes, fleeting shapes would appear against the night sky, ghostly riders clad in shadow, their faces obscured, their steeds impossibly swift. The Wild Hunt, they said, was passing. In medieval Shropshire, the Wild Hunt was not simply a fireside tale. Chroniclers like Walter Map and later folklore collectors recorded accounts that were treated with a certain seriousness. Some claimed it was led by a spectral figure, variously described as a long-dead nobleman, a huntsman cursed for his sins, or even a god from an older pre-Christian age, riding at the head of his phantom host. To see it was thought to be an omen. For the unlucky, a herald of death. For others, a sign that great events, war, famine, or upheaval, were at hand. What makes the Shropshire accounts intriguing is their consistency across decades, even centuries. Reports from different villages describe the hunt appearing in winter months, often along the same ridgelines or through the same wooded valleys. Eyewitnesses spoke of hounds with eyes like embers, riders whose armor made no sound, and a wind that seemed to follow in their wake, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something metallic, blood perhaps, or the cold tang of iron. Historians and folklorists have long sought to explain these sightings. One theory suggests that they were rooted in real events. The sound of mounted parties traveling by night, perhaps soldiers or hunting groups, misheard or glimpsed from a distance and transformed by fear and imagination into something supernatural. Shropshire's position near the Welsh marches made it a place of frequent skirmishes and military movements in the Middle Ages, and the clang of armor or the echo of hooves might have inspired or reinforced the legend. Another explanation draws on the landscape itself. Shropshire's valleys can funnel sound in strange ways, amplifying and distorting noises from miles away. A pack of hounds on a night hunt, or even the cry of wild animals, could be carried on the wind and twisted into something uncanny. Add to this the eerie effect of mist rising from the Severn or from the upland bogs, and a naturally occurring phenomenon begins to take on a supernatural form in the minds of those who witness it. Yet other scholars look further back, to pre-Christian belief systems. The Wild Hunt appears in various forms across northern Europe, and in some traditions it is linked to the god Woden or to other deities associated with the dead and the afterlife. Could the medieval Shropshire sightings have been echoes of an older ritual or myth, preserved in local memory and retold until it seemed to manifest in the physical world? More speculative theories suggest that the Wild Hunt was less about gods or ghosts and more about a social function, serving as a moral warning or a tool of control. In an age when the Church sought to steer people away from pagan practices, tales of cursed hunters condemned to ride for eternity may have reinforced the dangers of sin, oath-breaking, or neglecting Christian rites. The vision of the hunt, whether experienced in truth or in imagination, carried with it the weight of judgment. And yet, there are accounts that defy easy rationalization. Chroniclers record stories of entire communities hearing the hunt at once, the sound passing directly overhead, the ground trembling though no riders were seen. Some tales speak of spectral hounds leaving prints in the frost, or of riders vanishing into solid rock at the edge of a quarry. These details, whether exaggerated or faithfully reported, blur the line between folklore and first-hand testimony, forcing us to ask whether the Wild Hunt was purely a story told by firelight, or whether something in the dark hills of Shropshire genuinely stirred. Today, the lanes and footpaths where the hunt was once said to pass are quiet. The woods are dense with oak and ash, the ridges topped with heather. In winter, the wind still races along the valleys, carrying strange, dissonant sounds. Stand there in the cold, with the moon hidden behind cloud, and it is not hard to imagine the sudden blare of a horn, the thunder of hooves in the air above, and the knowledge, ancient, instinctive, that something is moving through the night. Were the Wild Hunt sightings in medieval Shropshire a collective imagining shaped by landscape, weather, and legend? Were they misinterpretations of real events, magnified into the supernatural by fear and storytelling? Or were they glimpses of a tradition older than the Norman conquest, a piece of the past that refused to die? Until the last echo of the phantom riders is explained, the hunt remains what it has always been, a fleeting sound in the darkness, carrying with it more questions than answers. From the wild, wind-lashed hills of Shropshire and the ghostly riders of the Wild Hunt, our journey now moves into the solemn, vaulted spaces of one of England's most hallowed sites, Canterbury Cathedral. Here, the cool air carries a faint scent of ancient stone and candle wax, and the stained glass windows cast colored light that seems almost to shimmer with the weight of centuries. For pilgrims in the Middle Ages, this was not merely a place of worship. It was the heart of a spiritual movement, a beacon that drew thousands from across Europe to venerate the relics of one man, St. Thomas Becket. The martyrdom of Thomas Becket in 1170 shocked Christendom. Slain within these very walls by knights loyal to King Henry II, his blood was said to have stained the cathedral floor, a mark of sanctity and defiance. In the years that followed, miracles were reported at his tomb, and Becket's relics became among the most prized in all of medieval Europe. They were enshrined in a magnificent golden reliquary, adorned with jewels and intricate metalwork, placed in a shrine so lavish that contemporary chroniclers struggled to describe its splendor. For more than 3 centuries, Becket's shrine was the destination for pilgrims of all stations. Nobles and paupers alike traveled the long, often perilous road to Canterbury, seeking healing, blessings, or absolution. Offerings of gold, silver, and precious stones enriched the shrine, turning it into both a spiritual treasure and an immense store of wealth. But in 1538, under the reign of King Henry VIII, that legacy was shattered. The Reformation swept through England with ruthless force, targeting shrines, relics, and symbols of the old faith. The king, eager to break with Rome and consolidate his power, ordered the destruction of Becket's shrine. Chroniclers tell us that royal commissioners dismantled it piece by piece, seizing its treasures for the crown. According to official records, the saint's bones were destroyed, burned, and scattered to the wind. And yet, the story does not end there. If the destruction was so thorough, why do rumors persist that the relics were spirited away before the king's men arrived? Some accounts hint at a quiet removal in the dead of night, undertaken by loyal monks or sympathizers who feared the king's wrath. Others speak of sealed containers disappearing from the cathedral's crypt, hidden in places known only to a select few. Could fragments of Becket's remains still lie concealed somewhere in Canterbury, or perhaps far beyond? There are tantalizing hints scattered through history. In the 19th century, a reliquary containing a fragment of bone, purported to be from St. Thomas, surfaced in France. It had reportedly been kept safe by exiled English clergy. Was this proof of a secret rescue centuries earlier, or simply one of the many relics distributed before the shrine's destruction? The Catholic Church, careful in its pronouncements, has never declared it an authenticated find. Other theories take a broader view. Could Becket's relics have been smuggled abroad during the turbulent years following his canonization? Some speculate that diplomatic missions or religious orders might have carried them to continental Europe, perhaps to Rome itself, as an act of preservation. In an era when relics were seen as both holy objects and potent political symbols, safeguarding them would have been more than an act of piety. It would have been a statement of defiance. There are also more fringe ideas, whispered among those who see Becket's legacy as too powerful to have been erased entirely. A few folkloric traditions suggest that the saint's remains were hidden within the cathedral itself, behind a wall or beneath a floor, awaiting a time when England would once again honor him openly. Modern surveys of Canterbury Cathedral have revealed voids and sealed chambers that remain unexplored, but the church authorities, mindful of both heritage and sanctity, are cautious about disturbing them. And then there is the matter of the pilgrims' ampullae, small lead flasks that once held water mixed with drops of Becket's blood. Thousands of these were carried away by medieval travelers and buried with the faithful across Europe. Could it be that the saint's relics, in a sense, were never entirely in one place? That pieces of his physical legacy remain scattered in graves, chapels, and reliquaries, quietly enduring in ways Henry VIII could not undo? The disappearance of Becket's relics is more than a tale of loss. It is a mirror of the turbulent centuries in which faith, politics, and power collided with seismic force. The fate of his remains touches on questions that reach far beyond Canterbury. How much of England's medieval heritage was truly destroyed, and how much simply went underground, waiting to be rediscovered? Standing in the cathedral today, in the place where his shrine once stood, it is difficult not to feel the absence. The gilded reliquary is gone. The pilgrims are gone. But the air still carries something. Perhaps memory, perhaps reverence, perhaps an echo of the devotion that once filled these walls. And one cannot help but wonder, if the relics of St. Thomas Becket do still exist, are they hidden within the ancient stones of Canterbury, slumbering in some forgotten crypt, or lying far from England, waiting for the right eyes to find them? From the question of St. Thomas Becket's missing relics, our journey now carries us northward, across the rolling hills and river valleys of Yorkshire, where the land itself seems to hold its breath. Here, beneath windswept skies, lie quiet meadows and scattered woodlands, their tranquility masking whispers of a long-forgotten conflict. No chronicle records it, no bard sings of it, yet traces on the land suggest that sometime in the 12th century, a battle was fought here, and then erased from history. The landscape offers little at first glance. The fields stretch out in muted greens and golds, divided by dry stone walls that trace lines older than memory. But walk a little further, and subtle irregularities begin to appear. Shallow depressions in the earth, slight ridges where the soil seems richer and darker. To the trained eye, these are not the random marks of nature. They may be the scars of camp trenches, the remnants of hastily dug defenses, or the outlines of mass graves. The 12th century was a time of turbulence for England, and Yorkshire, with its strategic position and deep ties to both Norman and Anglo-Scandinavian traditions, was no stranger to violence. Civil war raged during the period known as the Anarchy, 1135 to 1153, as King Stephen and Empress Matilda vied for the crown. Castles changed hands, raids swept across the countryside, and armies clashed in small, often unrecorded skirmishes. Yet, for this particular site, no contemporary record exists. Archaeological surveys in recent decades have uncovered a curious set of finds: rusted arrowheads of both Norman and Scandinavian style, fragments of chainmail, and sword pommels dated to the mid-12th century. Even more striking are the remains of horses, unearthed in a tight cluster, suggesting a cavalry engagement. And yet, the absence of any mention in surviving charters, monastic annals, or royal decrees is puzzling. Why would a battle, large enough to leave such tangible evidence, go unmentioned? Some historians suggest that it may have been an unofficial engagement, fought between rival barons without royal sanction, a feud that those in power wished to keep discreet. Others believe it might have been part of a larger campaign whose details were deliberately obscured in the political chaos of the time. In the medieval world, written history was often shaped by those who commissioned it. A defeat for the wrong side, or a clash that defied official narrative, could simply vanish from the record. Local legends, passed down through generations, add another layer of intrigue. In nearby villages, old tales speak of a red river that ran for days after a terrible fight, and of ghostly horsemen seen riding across the moor on misty nights. Some place names in the area, such as Bloody Bank or Dead Man's Hollow, hint at violent events long past, though they offer no direct proof. Were these merely folk tales, spun to explain odd features in the land, or fragmented memories of a very real conflict? Then there is the matter of foreign involvement. The 12th century saw Scotland pressing southward during periods of English weakness. Could this have been a border raid that met with fierce resistance? Some arrowhead designs match those used by Scottish forces of the era, though this could be coincidence, or evidence of mercenaries serving in northern England. More speculative theories drift into the realm of near silence in medieval record-keeping. One possibility is that this was a rebel uprising swiftly crushed, its leaders executed, and its very memory suppressed to prevent further unrest. Another, more fringe hypothesis suggests the battle was connected to the mysterious movements of displaced warriors from the First Crusade. Yorkshire, after all, was home to returning knights who brought with them new tactics, new weapons, and perhaps new enemies. A more unsettling line of thought wonders whether this unrecorded battle was not meant to be remembered because it was never officially declared a battle at all. Perhaps it was a massacre. In an age when feudal law was fluid and loyalties could shift overnight, it is not difficult to imagine a force of soldiers falling upon a village or encampment in retaliation, the violence later disguised, forgotten, or intentionally omitted from written history. The physical evidence remains maddeningly incomplete. Soil analysis indicates large-scale disturbances consistent with mass burial, but the bones that have been recovered are fragmentary and scattered, with no clear pattern of wounds. Some show signs of sword cuts, others of crushing blows, while others bear no obvious marks of battle at all. Could disease have played a role, striking during a campaign and leaving a battlefield that was more a graveyard of illness than of combat? In modern times, metal detectorists and amateur historians continue to find small relics in the area, buckles, belt fittings, and the occasional coin from the reign of Stephen or Henry II. Each discovery adds to the puzzle but does not resolve it. Without written records, the truth remains out of reach, balanced between history and legend. The wind moves through the grass now as it did then, whispering across the fields where men once fought and died for causes we can no longer name. Was this a clash between noble houses, erased to protect fragile political alliances? A border conflict the chroniclers deemed unworthy of ink? Or a hidden atrocity, buried with the victims beneath Yorkshire's quiet soil? Standing here, one feels the weight of what is missing, not just from the chronicles, but from our understanding of the past. The silence in the written record is as loud as any battle cry, and it leaves us with an unsettling question. If a battle could be fought, lives lost, and the land itself scarred, yet vanish entirely from official memory, how many other chapters of medieval England lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered, or to remain forever unknown? From the battle-scarred fields of Yorkshire, our path now leads south, to the quiet medieval city of Worcester, its cathedral rising above the River Severn, a silhouette of spires and towers reflected in the slow-moving water. Within the shadow of those ancient walls, in the hushed recesses of its archives, lies a riddle that has puzzled historians for generations: the authorship of the enigmatic Black Book. The Black Book is no ordinary manuscript. Bound in darkened leather that has withstood the centuries, its pages bear the delicate yet deliberate hand of a skilled scribe. The text within is a blend of law, custom, and cryptic commentary, part administrative record, part moral reflection, part something else. The ink, once deep and rich, has faded to a muted brown, but the careful strokes still carry an undeniable precision. To hold it is to feel the weight not only of parchment and binding, but of intention. This was a work meant to endure. Its contents are equally intriguing. The book details the statutes and rights of the Worcester Cathedral Priory, accounts of landholdings, and records of disputes with local lords. But scattered among the predictable entries are peculiar asides, brief moral parables, symbolic illustrations, and references to events otherwise unrecorded in the known chronicles of the time. One passage alludes to the Winter of the Silent Bells, another to the oath taken in shadow beneath the rood. Neither phrase appears in other surviving documents, leaving their meaning shrouded in mystery. The manuscript has been dated to the late 13th or early 14th century, but the identity of its creator remains frustratingly absent. No name appears on the title page, if it ever had one. No marginal note claims authorship. And yet, the writing style, the choice of vocabulary, and even the pattern of abbreviations hint at a singular mind behind it all. Who was this person? The most straightforward theory is that the Black Book was compiled by the prior or a senior monk of Worcester, someone entrusted with both the legal and spiritual welfare of the priory. Monastic scribes were often anonymous, their work subsumed into the identity of the institution they served. Yet even within such anonymity, individual flourishes can be found. And here, scholars note an unusual tone, sharper in political observations, more worldly in its commentary than one might expect from a cloistered writer. Could it have been the work of a lay clerk attached to the priory? In some instances, secular scribes were brought in for specialized tasks, particularly when legal disputes loomed. The Black Book contains several meticulously phrased arguments defending the priory's rights against encroachment by the Bishop of Worcester, a conflict known to have simmered during this period. A professional advocate, perhaps trained in London or Oxford, might well have been behind its creation. Then there is the matter of the personal voice that sometimes emerges from the text. Certain marginal notes, written in a smaller, tighter hand, express frustration, even sarcasm. One, beside a land grant dispute, reads, "As though the earth itself would change its owner with the wind." Another cryptic remark, near an account of a lost legal case, simply says, "They will answer to God, if not to us." These are not the impersonal notations of a neutral recorder. They are the words of someone deeply invested, perhaps even embittered. More speculative theories wander further afield. Some researchers have wondered whether the Black Book might be the work of a figure already known in other contexts, perhaps a chronicler who chose to hide their authorship here for political reasons. In this period, criticism of powerful church figures could carry severe consequences. Anonymity might have been protection as much as humility. Others see in the book's structure and hidden references a kind of coded commentary, messages embedded in the mundane record-keeping. One particularly persistent fringe theory suggests that the oath taken in shadow beneath the rood refers to a clandestine meeting of dissident clergy, possibly linked to broader movements for ecclesiastical reform. While most historians remain cautious about reading too much into such phrases, the possibility lingers in the absence of definitive proof. There is also the physical manuscript itself to consider. The parchment pages are of unusually high quality, and certain sections bear careful decorative initials in red and blue ink, suggesting access to the best materials and a scriptorium of considerable skill. This was not the work of a remote rural priory. It reflects resources and connections. That raises the question, if the author was indeed a Worcester monk, why leave no mark of authorship in a work of such quality and importance? Was it humility, or was it deliberate erasure? Theories multiply in the vacuum left by the missing name. Was the author a reformer whose ideas were later suppressed? A trusted servant whose loyalty wavered? A political outsider whose words were preserved but whose identity was stripped away by those who inherited his work? Even the dating is not without controversy. Some paleographers argue for a slightly earlier origin, pointing to letter forms that had largely fallen out of fashion by the mid-14th century. If true, this could place the manuscript closer to periods of royal unrest, when Worcester's priory navigated shifting alliances between crown and church. In such a climate, an unnamed author might not simply be a quirk, it might be a necessity. Today, the Black Book remains in the care of the Cathedral Library, preserved under controlled conditions. Scholars pore over its pages, scanning for overlooked clues, a subtle difference in ink here, a faint watermark in the parchment there. Each new examination brings the hope of finding that elusive link to a known scribe or historical figure. And yet, perhaps the greater allure lies in the fact that we do not know. The Black Book exists as a voice without a name, a record without a signature, its authority derived not from the identity of its creator, but from the endurance of its words. In a way, the anonymity amplifies the mystery, inviting each reader to imagine the person behind the pen, monk, clerk, rebel, or something altogether more unexpected. Somewhere in Worcester, centuries ago, someone sat in the dim glow of candlelight, dipping a quill into ink and setting down these words. Carefully, purposefully, perhaps with the weight of secrecy upon them. The identity of that hand has been lost to time, but the question remains, pressing quietly at the edges of every page. Who wrote the Black Book, and why did they hide their name? The stone walls of Beauchamp Tower rise solemnly against the gray London sky, their weathered surfaces whispering of centuries gone by. Narrow slit windows admit only thin blades of light into the dim interior, casting long shadows across the cold, uneven floor. In the stillness, the air seems charged, laden with the residue of long-forgotten voices and the weight of unspoken histories. It is here, according to some accounts, that the restless spirit of Lady Eleanor Cobham still lingers, her spectral presence tied to one of the most notorious scandals of England's 15th century. Lady Eleanor Cobham was no ordinary prisoner. Born into the minor nobility, she rose to prominence as the mistress, and later the wife, of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, uncle to King Henry VI, and heir presumptive to the throne. Her beauty and intelligence were matched by an ambition that, in her time, was both admired and feared. Yet her ascent ended in dramatic and ruinous fashion. In 1441, Eleanor was accused of practicing necromancy, consulting astrologers, and plotting to harm the young King Henry VI. The charges were grave, treason in the guise of sorcery, and they were pursued with ruthless precision. Contemporary records detail how she was examined by ecclesiastical authorities, subjected to public penance, and ultimately condemned to life imprisonment. She was moved between several locations, including Leeds Castle, Kenilworth Castle, and finally Beaumaris on the Isle of Anglesey, where she is believed to have died in 1452. The official version of events paints her as a dangerous and ambitious woman who dabbled in the occult to secure power. Yet, even in her own time, whispers suggested that the charges were politically motivated, part of a scheme to eliminate her husband's influence and remove a potential challenge to rival factions at court. Humphrey himself would be arrested and die under suspicious circumstances shortly after her downfall. But if history has recorded the political intrigue, it is folklore that has preserved her ghost. Accounts of her spectral appearances often center on the Tower of London, though there is no definitive record that she was held there for long. Witnesses across the centuries have described a tall, elegant woman in flowing gowns of deep blue or black, gliding silently along the corridors or appearing suddenly in the shadows. In some tellings, her face is partially hidden by a veil. In others, her eyes are described as intense and sorrowful, locking on to the observer before she vanishes. At Beauchamp Tower, guides speak of cold spots that linger in specific corners, even when the rest of the chamber is warm. Some visitors claim to have heard the faint rustle of skirts on stone steps, though no one is there. At night, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps has been reported in passages that should be empty. The detail most often repeated is the fragrance, an unexpected trace of violets or lavender drifting in the air before her appearance. Skeptics, of course, offer explanations rooted in psychology and environment. Old stone buildings can produce eerie drafts, and the interplay of light and shadow can deceive the eye. The human mind, primed by centuries of ghost stories, might conjure an image where none exists. The floral scent could be the residue of cleaning agents or the effect of suggestion on the senses. Yet others argue that the persistence of these stories, spread across different locations and generations, suggests something more enduring. How is it that descriptions of her attire and bearing, given by witnesses centuries apart, align so closely? Could there be a cultural memory at work? An echo of a real woman whose spirit, or at least her reputation, refuses to fade? There are those who believe that Eleanor's ghost is not merely a product of legend, but a manifestation of injustice. In this view, she appears not as a threat, but as a reminder, a silent protest against the machinations that destroyed her life. Folklore in some regions even casts her as a tragic figure, wronged by history, condemned for crimes she may not have committed, her spirit trapped between worlds. A more speculative fringe theory links her ghost to the objects she once possessed. It is said that certain jewels and manuscripts once belonging to her were scattered after her arrest, some ending up in private collections. A handful of paranormal enthusiasts claim that locations connected to these artifacts have experienced unusual activity, as if her spirit remains bound not to a single site, but to the remnants of her life. Curiously, the most striking variation in her legend comes from Anglesey, near Beaumaris Castle, where local tradition insists she died. There, the figure is described not in regal finery, but in a simple gown, wandering near the shore at dusk. Some fishermen claim to have seen her standing at the water's edge, gazing toward the horizon, as though searching for something, or someone, long lost. Is the ghost of Lady Eleanor Cobham an invention, built from centuries of retelling, a symbol of feminine ambition punished by a male-dominated court? Or does her presence, as countless witnesses insist, still drift through England's oldest walls and along its misty shores? Standing within the dim, echoing chamber of Beauchamp Tower, the question feels less like idle curiosity and more like a quiet challenge from the past. Perhaps her story is not yet fully told. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the reach of recorded history, the truth of Lady Eleanor's life and the reason her ghost endures still waits to be uncovered. On the quiet banks of the River Windrush in Oxfordshire, the ruins of Minster Lovell Hall stand in silent decay. Moss creeps along the weathered stone walls, and wild grasses sway gently where grand chambers once echoed with the sounds of feasts and laughter. The great hall, now roofless, opens to the sky, its arched windows framing drifting clouds instead of candlelit banquets. It is here, amid the crumbling remnants of medieval splendor, that one of England's most unsettling historical mysteries came to light. A skeleton found in a hidden chamber, centuries after its occupant's death. The story begins in the 18th century, during restoration work at Minster Lovell Hall. Laborers, clearing debris and exploring the long abandoned structure, stumbled upon a small, concealed room sealed behind a heavy wall. Inside, slumped in a chair, sat the remarkably preserved remains of a man. Still clad in the fragments of what had once been fine clothing, his bones rested undisturbed, as though he had simply fallen asleep and never awoken. Beside him lay a table, upon which were the decayed remnants of a book and a dried-up cup. What could explain such a haunting scene? The most popular theory links the skeleton to Francis Lovell, Viscount Lovell, a staunch supporter of Richard III during the Wars of the Roses. After Richard's defeat at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 and the subsequent rise of Henry VII, Lovell became a hunted man. Chroniclers tell us he fought on in subsequent uprisings, including the Lambert-Simnel Rebellion of 1487, after which he vanished from recorded history. Some accounts claimed he fled abroad. Others whispered that he hid in his ancestral home, Minster Lovell Hall. Could it be that the skeleton belonged to him? The theory is compelling. Lovell, seeking refuge, might have been concealed by loyal servants in the chamber, safe from the king's men. But if that was the case, why did he never leave? The tale continues that the servant entrusted with his secret either died unexpectedly or was otherwise unable to return, leaving Lovell trapped in the hidden room. Alone, with dwindling food and water, he would have met a slow and lonely death. It is a story that chills the imagination. But is it the truth? Skeptics point out that no contemporary record explicitly places Lovell at Minster Lovell Hall after 1487. Moreover, the survival of a skeleton in a sitting position, still within clothing, suggests conditions of preservation that are rare and not easily explained. Without forensic analysis, unavailable in the era of discovery, the remains were never conclusively identified. Other theories propose that the skeleton could have belonged to a different fugitive, perhaps a Catholic priest in hiding during the Elizabethan persecutions, or a political dissident sheltering from Tudor reprisals. Minster Lovell Hall, like many great houses of the period, could have harbored priest holes and other secret spaces for concealment. If so, the chamber might have been part of a network of safe rooms, its tragic occupant simply one of many who risked hiding there. There is also the possibility, though seldom raised in polite discussion, that the skeleton was the victim of deliberate entombment. In a time when vengeance was often personal and swift, sealing an enemy alive in stone could serve as a cruel form of retribution. Was the chamber a refuge or a prison? Even more speculative are the stories that link the site to buried treasure and family feuds. In these versions, the hidden room becomes a vault, and the skeleton an unfortunate guard or betrayer who paid with his life. Local legends sometimes blend the Lovell mystery with tales of gold hidden by the family before their fall from grace, suggesting that the man died protecting or attempting to steal something of immense value. Yet no treasure has ever been found. Only the image of that room remains, dust motes swirling in the beam of a lantern, the stillness of centuries broken only by the shuffle of workmen's boots, and the unsettling sight of a human figure seated in eternal silence. Curiously, by the time antiquarians began to investigate, the skeleton had already been removed and its whereabouts lost. No formal record of its disposition survives, leaving researchers with nothing but eyewitness accounts, some written decades after the fact. This absence of physical evidence only deepens the mystery. Without the remains, there can be no modern scientific testing, no isotope analysis to trace the man's diet and origin, no DNA sampling to link him to known descendants. Today, Minster Lovell Hall is a place of quiet beauty, The river reflects the weathered arches, and swans glide where once knights rode. Visitors wander its grounds with cameras and guidebooks, often unaware of the dark discovery made there centuries ago. But for those who know the story, the ruins hold a deeper resonance. Was the skeleton truly Francis Lovell, the last loyalist of a fallen king, starved and forgotten in his own home? Was he a nameless refugee from later religious strife, whose desperate hiding place became his tomb? Or was he a victim of betrayal, sealed away not by fate, but by the deliberate hand of another? Standing within the roofless shell of the great hall, it is difficult not to feel the weight of those questions. The wind sighs through the empty windows, the stones hold their silence, and the hidden chamber, if it still exists, remains closed to the world. Somewhere in that silence, the truth waits. But whether it will ever be uncovered is something no historian can say. On a quiet bend of the River Coquet in Northumberland, hidden beneath the shadow of Warkworth Castle, there lies a place unlike any other in England, a place carved entirely into the living rock. The Warkworth Hermitage is not a ruin in the traditional sense. It is a chapel and adjoining chamber hewn from sandstone cliffs, standing as if it has grown organically from the land itself. Moss clings to the damp walls, and the air inside carries the chill of centuries. Here, elaborate carvings, delicate tracery, a vaulted ceiling, and a finely wrought altar emerge directly from the stone, as if the builder had coaxed a Gothic church out of the rock with nothing but patience and devotion. And yet, for all its detail, for all its artistry, no one knows with certainty who built it, or why. The earliest records place the Hermitage in the 14th century, but the documents are frustratingly vague. A royal license from 1400 acknowledges its existence, granting a priest the right to celebrate Mass there. But even this legal recognition is silent on the identity of its original creator. Was it the work of a local lord seeking penance, a recluse fulfilling a vow, or a Mason monk inspired by visions? One of the most enduring stories ties the Hermitage to the Percy family, powerful lords of Northumberland whose fortress loomed just upstream. According to tradition, it was constructed by a grieving knight in memory of his lost love. Some versions say she drowned in the Coquet, others that she died of illness or war. In this telling, the knight withdrew from the world, carving the Hermitage with his own hands. Each chisel strike a prayer for her soul. The legend is romantic, poignant, but entirely unverified. No chronicle names the knight, no family records mention such an undertaking. Architectural clues suggest a builder of unusual skill. The carvings are precise, the proportions harmonious. The small east window, cut to catch the morning light, shows an understanding of both design and spiritual symbolism. Was the creator a trained mason working in secrecy? If so, who paid for his time? Such craftsmanship was costly. Could the Hermitage have been a sanctioned work of devotion, ordered by a religious house and later absorbed into local lore? The absence of definitive evidence opens the door to more speculative theories. Some suggest it was the site of an earlier pre-Christian sanctuary, adapted by medieval hands. The Coquet's banks have been inhabited for thousands of years. Perhaps the builder was continuing an older tradition of sacred space along the river. In this view, the Hermitage's location, half-hidden, accessible only by boat, would not be an accident, but part of a ritual geography. Others point to its solitary nature. Unlike parish churches or monastic chapels, the Hermitage seems designed for one. The living quarters are small and austere, suitable only for a single occupant. Was the builder also the intended inhabitant, a hermit priest who fashioned his own dwelling? Medieval England had no shortage of religious recluses, but the effort required to create such a place from solid rock would have been extraordinary. What kind of man would choose to live, worship, and die here, cut off from all but the river and God? There are even those who look for signs of hidden purpose. Some carvings, weathered though they are, seem symbolic beyond their religious function. Spirals, interlaced patterns, and animal forms reminiscent of older Celtic or Norse motifs. Could the builder have been preserving something of his own heritage beneath the veneer of Christian devotion? Or are these merely decorative flourishes, interpreted through the lens of modern imagination? What complicates matters further is that the Hermitage has survived largely intact. While castles have crumbled and churches have fallen to ruin, this chapel in the cliff remains. Its survival owes much to its obscurity. The world has passed it by. But that same obscurity has kept its story out of reach. No written record has surfaced to tie it definitively to a name, a date, or a purpose. Standing inside, one cannot help but feel the intimacy of the space. The altar, carved with intricate niches, still seems ready for offerings. The carved effigy of a knight in prayer rests in a side recess, his hands clasped, his face serene. Is he the builder himself, immortalized in stone, or a symbolic figure, representing the chivalric ideal of devotion? Without inscriptions, the stone keeps its silence. Even the act of getting to the Hermitage today echoes its medieval seclusion. Visitors must cross the river by boat, the water lapping against the hull just as it did centuries ago. As the boatman pulls you across, the chapel emerges from the greenery like a secret revealed. Yet, it remains no less enigmatic once you stand within it. Historians have tried to fit the Hermitage into known patterns, as a chantry chapel for the dead, a private place of prayer for a noble household, a penitent's retreat. All are possible, none are proven. The lack of documentation may be due to its private nature, intended for one's soul's salvation rather than public worship. Or perhaps it was deliberately kept from the records, its creation an act meant to remain hidden. And so the question endures: who carved the Warkworth Hermitage? A noble in grief? A Mason monk with time and vision? A hermit fulfilling a vow of solitude? Or someone whose name was never recorded at all, leaving only their handiwork as testament? The sandstone walls hold their own counsel. The river keeps its secrets. And the Hermitage, beautiful and unclaimed, remains as it has for centuries. A place shaped by unknown hands, where the boundary between devotion and mystery is as thin as the chisel marks still etched in stone. In the quiet folds of North Yorkshire, where rolling hills give way to the rugged beauty of the North York moors, the ruins of Byland Abbey rise like the ribs of some ancient petrified creature. Even in ruin, its scale is impressive. The skeletal remains of a great Cistercian abbey, once one of the most magnificent in all of England. Its weathered arches frame the open sky, and the faint scent of wild thyme drifts through broken cloisters where the chants of monks once echoed. Byland was no minor outpost. Founded in the 12th century, it stood as a beacon of monastic discipline, its community bound by the Cistercian ideals of simplicity, devotion, and labor. The abbey's wealth grew over the decades, its lands stretching across fertile valleys, its granges producing food and income to sustain a thriving brotherhood. Records from its peak suggest dozens of monks lived and prayed here, their lives ordered by the strict rhythm of the rule of Saint Benedict. And yet, at some point in its later history, the monks of Byland Abbey seem to have vanished. This is not the ordinary story of monastic decline during the dissolution under Henry VIII, when abbeys were forcibly emptied and dismantled. Instead, the mystery of Byland's vanishing appears to have unfolded much earlier, long before royal commissioners came knocking. Certain 14th century accounts hint at a period when the abbey stood oddly quiet, its population drastically reduced, as if the brothers had departed en masse. No official record states why. No chronicle offers a full explanation. What happened? One theory, grounded in the historical record, points to plague. The Black Death of the mid-14th century devastated monastic communities across England, sometimes erasing entire houses in a matter of weeks. It is possible that Byland suffered such a fate, the disease claiming life after life until only a handful remained. Yet the Abbey's surviving records, fragmentary though they are, do not explicitly mention a catastrophic death toll. And curiously, the Abbey appears to have maintained some level of operation afterward, suggesting that at least a small community remained. Another possibility lies in political turmoil. The Anglo-Scottish wars of the 14th century swept repeatedly through the region. Armies, both English and Scottish, raided, burned, and extorted from religious houses. Byland Abbey, not far from the contested borderlands, might have been targeted. Perhaps the monks fled to safer monastic houses, leaving the abbey unattended for years. But again, there is no conclusive proof, and the abbey's own archives are silent on the matter. Then there are the stranger accounts. Whispers preserved in local tradition and odd notes in later monastic manuscripts. Byland Abbey, unusually for its time, is associated with a collection of ghost stories written down by monks in the 15th century. These tales speak of restless spirits, supernatural encounters, and demonic apparitions witnessed by the brethren. Could the monks' departure have been tied to something more intangible? Fear, perhaps, of a haunting or a curse? Some speculate that the abbey was built over an older sacred site, one that retained its power in the minds of locals. The Cistercians were known for choosing remote, wild locations for their houses, and it is not impossible that the ground beneath Byland held significance long before Christianity took root here. If unsettling events, strange lights, unexplained deaths, whispered voices were interpreted as signs of divine displeasure or worse, might that have driven the community away? More fringe theories wander even further from the beaten path. In certain retellings, the monks did not simply leave. They disappeared without trace, their fates unknown. Such stories, while unsupported by hard evidence, have a way of clinging to a place. They speak of monks last seen walking into the surrounding moors, never to return, or of a mysterious visitor whose arrival marked the beginning of the abbey's decline. These are tales more of folklore than history, but they persist, passed down by generations of locals. What complicates the story is the nature of medieval record-keeping. Monastic houses kept meticulous chronicles when they wanted to, but they could also be selective. Embarrassing events, internal disputes, or spiritual scandals might be omitted altogether. If the monks of Byland had quarreled with their abbot, or if a crisis of faith had fractured the community, such matters could have been quietly erased from the official record. And so, the question remains, was the vanishing of the Byland monks a sudden dramatic event, or a slow, quiet exodus obscured by time? When later generations came to notice the abbey's silence, did they mistake gradual decline for a single mysterious departure? Today, the ruins stand serene in their isolation, the only movement the passing shadow of a cloud or the slow flight of a bird across the nave's empty span. The wind hums through the arches, and the grass grows where choir stalls once stood. In the quiet, it is easy to imagine the sound of sandaled feet on flagstones, the low murmur of Latin prayers. But these are only echoes in the mind. What really happened to the monks of Byland Abbey? Did disease take them? Did war scatter them? Did fear, superstition, or something altogether stranger drive them from their cloister? The stones do not answer. The surviving documents remain mute, and the moors, stretching away in every direction, seem to offer no more clues than they did centuries ago. Only the same silent question carried on the wind, waiting for someone to solve it. The night air over the Norman port of Barfleur was cold and still. the faint scent of salt clinging to the damp timbers of the quay. The tide swelled gently under the hull of a sleek, newly refitted vessel, her white-painted planks gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She was called La Blanche Nef, the White Ship, and by all accounts, she was the pride of the Channel. That evening in November 1120, the vessel was preparing to carry a passenger list unlike any other. Some of the most important figures in the realm, including William Adelin, the only legitimate son and heir of King Henry I of England. The White Ship was more than a royal transport. It was a statement of prestige. Its captain, Thomas Fitzstephen, came from a family with deep ties to the crown. His father had once ferried William the Conqueror across these same waters. That night, the ship's decks were crowded with young nobles, many of them the future of England and Normandy, their laughter spilling into the chill air. Chroniclers later claimed that wine flowed freely before the voyage began, offered in abundance by Fitzstephen himself. Even the king had boarded the vessel earlier in the day, though in a twist of fate, Henry chose to depart on a different ship, leaving his son and the youthful court to follow. As the tide turned and darkness thickened over the channel, the White Ship set out, its oars cutting silently at first, then striking the water with more force. It was said that the passengers, emboldened by drink and camaraderie, urged the crew to overtake the king's vessel, which had left ahead of them. Whether from pride, ambition, or simply the confidence of a well-built ship, the crew obeyed. But the White Ship never reached England. Somewhere just beyond the safety of the harbor, in waters locals knew could hide unseen hazards, the vessel struck a submerged rock. The impact tore into the hull with a sickening finality, and icy seawater rushed in. Panic erupted. In the confusion, a small boat was lowered, carrying William Adelin to safety. But in a moment of tragic impulse, the young prince turned back, attempting to rescue his half-sister still trapped aboard. The lifeboat was overwhelmed by desperate passengers clinging for survival. It capsized, and within minutes, nearly everyone was in the freezing sea. When dawn broke over Barfleur, the tide carried only wreckage and silence. Of the hundreds aboard, only one man, a humble butcher from Rouen named Barold, was found alive. His testimony became the sole first-hand account of that night, though it could answer only so much. What caused the disaster? The official explanation, repeated in chronicles, was simple. The ship had been sailing too fast in dangerous waters, her crew distracted and impaired by drink. The White Ship, new and powerful though she was, could not survive the gash in her hull. But as with many tragedies that ripple through history, unanswered questions lingered. Some have speculated that the wreck was not purely an accident. The political stakes were immense. William Adelin's death plunged England into a succession crisis, known as the Anarchy, that tore the realm apart for nearly 2 decades. Could rivals have arranged for the White Ship to fail? It would not be the first time in medieval politics that a misfortune conveniently removed an obstacle to power. Yet the challenge to such a theory is obvious. Sabotaging a vessel carrying so many high-ranking nobles risked angering multiple powerful families, and no contemporary account hints at a conspiracy. Others point to the weather and local geography. The waters near Barfleur are treacherous, studded with hidden rocks and shifting currents. Some navigators believed that the approach the White Ship took that night was too close to shore. Yet experienced seamen should have known the risks. Was it overconfidence in a new ship? Or did the revelry and the desire to outpace the king's vessel cloud judgment? Then there are the more elusive explanations, born not from court records but from whispers and folklore. Sailors of the time often spoke of omens, ill winds, strange lights on the water, or the appearance of ghostly figures on the shore before a voyage. A handful of later accounts, perhaps embellished by centuries of retelling, suggest that warnings were ignored, or that some passengers hesitated to board after a sudden chill fell over the harbor. Could the sinking have been seen as a form of divine punishment, as some clerics claimed in the aftermath? After all, the court of Henry I had no shortage of enemies in the church, and the White Ship's passengers represented much of the king's political strength. The loss reshaped the course of English history. With William Adelin gone, Henry had no legitimate male heir. His attempts to secure the succession for his daughter Matilda ultimately failed to prevent civil war. The chaos that followed, the shifting loyalties, the sieges, the years of famine and unrest, might never have happened had the White Ship completed its journey. And yet, for all the chronicles, the sermons, the royal decrees that followed, the actual moment of disaster remains frustratingly opaque. The darkness of that November night, the rush of cold water, and the silence of the dead mean that most of the truth lies at the bottom of the channel, beyond reach. No salvage was attempted, and if the ship's remains still rest beneath the waves, they have been hidden for 9 centuries. One is left to wonder, if divers could find the White Ship today, would her timbers tell a story that matches the accepted history? Would they reveal a simple accident born of arrogance and speed? Or would some anomaly, a mark of deliberate damage, a clue in the cargo, point to something more deliberate? The sea off Barfleur holds its secrets well, and as the waves roll endlessly over the place where the White Ship slipped into darkness, the unanswered questions linger, carried forward by the tide, waiting for someone bold enough to look for them. In the soft, filtered light of an English morning, the weathered stone walls of a forgotten chapel stand quiet beneath a veil of ivy. Its doorway arches like the mouth of an untold story, its columns marked by centuries of wind and rain. At first glance, it is one of many medieval places of worship scattered across the countryside. Small, unassuming, built in the language of piety. But a closer look reveals something unusual. Along the edges of window frames, beneath worn capitals, and on the hidden undersides of ledges are patterns, spirals, interlacing vines, clusters of geometric knots. They seem decorative, yet too deliberate to be mere ornament. To the untrained eye, these carvings are simply the craft of a medieval mason, an aesthetic flourish left to grace God's house. But to others, historians, symbologists, and the occasional cryptographer, they are whispers from a deeper language, a code layered into stone. Their presence recalls the far more famous Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, whose 15th century carvings have invited speculation for generations. What makes the English examples so intriguing is not only their similarity to Rosslyn's symbolic complexity, but the fact that they appear in sites predating it, churches and chapels built between the 12th and 14th centuries, when England was a shifting landscape of feudal rivalries, crusading fervor, and quiet monastic scholarship. One such site lies tucked in the rolling hills of Shropshire, where a ruined chapel, its roof long collapsed, still bears stone bosses carved with what appear to be musical notation. The shapes, faint yet discernible, resemble neumes, the earliest form of medieval musical script. Could they be liturgical, a fragment of a forgotten hymn? Or are they, as some have suggested, part of a cipher, a message meant to be sung only by those who could decode it? The pattern seems too irregular for pure chant, leading some to wonder whether it concealed a numerical key or a set of coordinates known only to its creators. Elsewhere, in the quiet nave of a small Yorkshire church, a series of carved cubes line the archway. Each face is etched with a different geometric design: stars, interlocking circles, and angular shapes reminiscent of runes. To the average parishioner of the Middle Ages, these might have passed unnoticed, or perhaps were explained away as apotropaic marks, symbols to ward off evil. But in recent decades, Some researchers have suggested they follow a sequential pattern consistent with certain medieval cryptographic grids used by monastic scribes to encode sensitive information. Mainstream explanations point toward medieval masons' marks. Stonecutters often signed their work with simple symbols, both for pride and as a record for payment. In many cases, these marks were geometric, lending them a superficial resemblance to codes. But here, the density and arrangement of the carvings seem to go beyond a craftsman's signature. Why repeat certain symbols in specific sequences? Why hide some beneath ledges or behind choir stalls, where no casual visitor could see them? Speculation inevitably drifts toward the more elusive possibilities. During the Crusades, English knights traveled through lands rich with diverse symbolic traditions, Byzantine, Arabic, and earlier. Could some of these carvings be adaptations of designs encountered abroad, encoded into ecclesiastical stonework upon their return? Or were they messages between factions within the church itself, a subtle method of passing knowledge during times of political tension? The 13th and 14th centuries saw moments when Rome's authority in England was contested, and coded communication might have been a means of survival. Then there is the inevitable link some draw to the Knights Templar. Though disbanded in the early 14th century, the Templars were reputed to have brought back sacred relics, ancient texts, and forbidden knowledge from their campaigns in the Holy Land. Rosslyn Chapel's lore often entwines with these legends, and some enthusiasts claim that England's lesser-known carved sites represent earlier stages of the same symbolic tradition, markers left by those in possession of esoteric truths. No definitive proof supports such a claim, but the persistence of the theory speaks to the carving's capacity to stir the imagination. The most radical interpretations suggest that these symbols are not merely coded messages for human eyes, but harmonic or geometric keys designed to interact with sound or light. In certain chapels, when light falls through stained glass at particular angles, especially during solstices or equinoxes, some carvings seem to catch the glow more vividly, their shapes outlined with startling clarity. Could this be intentional? If so, what was meant to be revealed only in those fleeting moments? Skeptics argue for a simpler reading, that medieval artisans drew inspiration from pattern books, repeating motifs with no deeper meaning beyond beauty and tradition. Indeed, medieval stone carving often mixed the sacred and the decorative without conscious distinction. But the argument struggles when confronted with the sheer precision of some arrangements, or their placement in locations suggesting secrecy rather than display. And then there are the unfinished carvings, designs begun and abruptly halted, as if the mason had been interrupted or forbidden to continue. In one Lincolnshire church, a half-completed sequence of interlaced knots stops mid-pattern on the south wall, leaving the stone smooth beyond that point. No record explains why. Was the mason called away? Did the patron die? Or was the meaning of the carving discovered and suppressed? If these are indeed codes, their key has been lost, or perhaps hidden in plain sight, scattered across multiple sites whose connections remain unrecognized. Much like the medieval manuscripts that survive with marginalia no one can fully decipher, these carvings stand as artifacts of communication whose audience is gone, their silence deepened by the centuries. Walking through one of these chapels today, it is easy to feel the weight of their enigma. The air smells faintly of stone dust and candle wax. Sunlight slants through narrow windows, catching motes that drift like whispers. You run your hand over the cool surface of a column and feel the shallow grooves left by a chisel 600 years ago. The pattern is there, tangible, deliberate, patient. And you can't help but ask yourself, was this the work of a man passing time with his tools, or was it the quiet voice of a message meant for someone who never came? The truth may rest somewhere between art and code, devotion and secrecy, but as long as the stones endure, so too will the question, are we looking at decoration, or are we standing in the presence of an encrypted history carved into England's sacred walls, still waiting to be read? It was a still night over Canterbury, the kind of silence that seems to hold its breath. The cobbled streets were empty, the timber-framed houses leaning toward one another like gossiping elders in the dark. Above them rose the towering silhouette of the cathedral, its spire a blackened needle against the night sky. In the 14th century, this was England's spiritual heart, a place that drew pilgrims from across the realm. But on certain nights, according to the records of monks and townsfolk alike, the heavens above this holy city became the stage for something far stranger. Witnesses spoke of lights, bright, moving, and unnatural, appearing in the sky over Canterbury. Some described them as single glowing orbs that shimmered like molten metal before vanishing. Others told of multiple lights, darting and weaving in silent arcs, as if engaged in some unspoken dance. The chronicles do not record the sound of thunder or the smell of fire. Instead, they speak of a quiet awe, mingled with a fear that such signs could only herald divine judgment, or something worse. The first widely noted account comes from 1322, preserved in a monastic annal that otherwise concerned itself with harvest yields and political disputes. One winter evening, a group of townspeople reportedly gathered in the marketplace to watch a strange luminescence hover above the cathedral's great tower. The light did not flicker like flame, nor waver like torchlight. It burned steady, as if held aloft by an invisible hand. A priest, called from the nearby cloisters, offered prayers, fearing an omen. Yet before any conclusion could be drawn, the light simply winked out, leaving the night darker than before. A generation later, in 1361, a different chronicler described a company of fiery shapes moving through the sky above the city. This time, the lights seemed to trail one another, tracing slow curves as though borne by the wind, except that the wind that night was still. Some swore the lights moved with purpose, descending briefly toward the city before rising again and disappearing to the east. What could they have been? The medieval mind often sought meaning in the heavens. Comets were portents of kings' deaths, eclipses, warnings of upheaval. Unusual lights could be read as celestial signs, messages from God, or perhaps from the saints. In Canterbury, home to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, such phenomena would have carried immense symbolic weight. Was the city being blessed or warned? Were these lights the spirits of pilgrims long past, or angels descending for reasons unseen? More earthly explanations have been proposed by modern historians. Some suggest these lights could have been atmospheric phenomena, rare manifestations of ball lightning, or the play of moonlight on ice crystals in the upper atmosphere. The medieval climate, marked by the so-called Little Ice Age, could have produced unusual weather patterns conducive to optical illusions. Others speculate about marsh gas igniting over nearby wetlands, though Canterbury's topography and the altitude of the sightings make this less convincing. Yet, the descriptions in the chronicles don't always fit neatly into natural explanations. The lights were said to move against the wind, to hover for minutes at a time, and to vanish instantaneously rather than fade. Some reports even claim that they changed color, pale gold shifting to red, then to a cold blue-white, before vanishing entirely. This was centuries before the age of aircraft or lanterns suspended from balloons, leaving few obvious medieval sources for such displays. Inevitably, more speculative theories emerge. In the more imaginative corners of historical interpretation, some have wondered whether these sightings could be akin to what later centuries would call unidentified flying objects. Though the term is modern, the phenomena it describes are not bound by era. Were these lights visitors from beyond our world, or simply from beyond our understanding? Others point to the possibility of secret experiments, perhaps in alchemy or optics, carried out by scholars or wandering mystics, their work accidentally illuminating the night. The University of Oxford was already a hub of curious minds, and itinerant scholars sometimes passed through Canterbury on their way to or from the continent. Could the lights have been the unintended byproduct of some medieval invention now lost to history? Religious interpretations persisted well into later retellings. Local folklore grew around the lights, with some claiming they were linked to the martyrdom of Becket, the saint's spirit manifesting in radiant form. In some versions, the lights appeared only on the anniversary of his death or during periods of political unrest involving the church. Such patterns, if they ever existed, were never fully recorded, yet the stories endured, whispered among pilgrims as they approached the cathedral by torchlight. The last major medieval mention of the Canterbury lights comes from 1395 in the account of a visiting Flemish merchant. He wrote of arriving late at night, the city's gates locked, and witnessing 3 globes of fire circling above the cathedral like watchmen in the sky. When he asked about them the next day, locals dismissed his question with a mixture of reverence and reluctance, as if speaking too freely of the lights might invite their return. No physical evidence of these lights remains. They left no scorch marks, no fragments, no physical trace, only words committed to parchment and passed through the ages. And yet, those words are stubborn. They resist easy dismissal, persisting in the historical record when they could just as easily have been ignored or omitted. Were the chroniclers simply embellishing to awe their readers, or did they record what they, and many others, truly saw? Today, the spires of Canterbury Cathedral still dominate the skyline, and the city at night is lit by the soft glow of electric lamps. But if you walk the grounds alone, when the bells have fallen silent and the streets are empty, you might look up and imagine what it was like in the 14th century. A clear, moonless sky, the sound of your own breath, and then a light. Floating, burning, moving in ways the mind struggles to name. And you might ask yourself, were those lights the tricks of weather and imagination, or the shadows of something far more enduring, something that has been watching and waiting above Canterbury for centuries? In a quiet, climate-controlled archive room in London's Museum of the Order of St. John, shelves are lined with centuries-old manuscripts, carefully catalogued, bound in leather, their pages browned and brittle. They tell the story of the Knights Hospitaller, warrior monks sworn to defend pilgrims, heal the sick, and guard the Christian strongholds of the medieval world. Yet, among these preserved volumes and records, there is an absence as profound as the collection itself. An entire segment of the Order's most important documents is missing. These were not minor papers, but the central archives that once recorded centuries of activity, decisions, alliances, and wealth. Their disappearance remains one of the most puzzling archival mysteries of medieval England. The Hospitallers, formerly known as the Order of the Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, were more than just a military brotherhood. From their origins in the 11th century, they combined martial discipline with the running of hospitals, fortresses, and estates spread across Europe and the Levant. By the time they established their headquarters in England, their possessions ranged from farmland in Yorkshire to valuable urban properties in London. Every transfer of land, every royal grant, every secret negotiation, these were recorded in the archives. And yet, by the late medieval period, much of this record vanished without trace. The disappearance was not the result of centuries of gradual decay. Contemporary references suggest that the archives, bundles of charters, letters, and financial ledgers, were intact and accessible well into the 14th century. They were likely stored in the Order's London Priory, a fortified complex whose treasury and library were guarded day and night. Then, at some point, they were gone. Not misfiled, not damaged, gone. The most straightforward theory is one of destruction. Fires were a constant hazard in medieval London, and the Priory was not immune to them. Could a single blaze have reduced the records to ash, leaving nothing but fragments and smoke? Possible, but no chronicler recorded such a loss, and the Hospitallers, known for their meticulous administration, would likely have recreated at least some of the lost documents from other holdings in Europe. That they did not suggests the loss was not merely accidental. Another possibility is that the archives were removed deliberately. The 14th and 15th centuries were a turbulent time for military orders. The dramatic downfall of the Knights Templar in 1307, with arrests, trials, and property seizures, showed how vulnerable such groups could be to political winds. Could the Hospitallers have hidden or relocated their most sensitive records, perhaps moving them overseas, to prevent them from falling into hostile hands? Some historians point to the years following the Templars' suppression, when suspicion lingered over all military orders, as a time when secrecy might have been a prudent choice. If the records were removed, where might they have gone? One suggestion is that they were sent to the order's central command, which by the 14th century had moved from Palestine to Rhodes. A transfer like this would make sense for security, yet searches in the archives of the Knights of St. John in Malta, the order's later home, have yielded no sign of them. Were they lost during the long voyage, captured by pirates, or deliberately destroyed before they could be seized by an enemy fleet? There is also a darker theory. The archives may have contained evidence of dealings and transactions the Hospitallers would rather keep from public record, land acquisitions through questionable means, political agreements with rival powers, or correspondence revealing rifts within the order. In such a case, their destruction may have been an act of internal erasure, rewriting history by removing its paper trail. Without the records, entire episodes of the Order's English history have become impossible to reconstruct. More speculative voices imagine an even grander hidden cache. The Hospitallers had deep connections across Europe, from royal courts to merchant guilds, and their archives may have included more than property records, perhaps maps of fortifications, coded instructions for military campaigns, or even relic inventories. Could these have been spirited away to a secret vault, like the legendary Templar treasures never meant to be found? While such ideas drift toward the romantic, they cannot be entirely disproven. The absence of the archives has shaped our understanding of the Hospitallers in England. We know of their presence from scattered references, legal disputes in royal records, mentions in wills, fragments of charters preserved in unrelated collections, but the continuous narrative is broken. It is as if someone tore the spine from a book, leaving the pages loose and incomplete. This loss also affects how we understand the Order's role in larger events. The Hospitallers were active during the 100 Years' War, the Black Death, and the Wars of the Roses. Did their archives record how these upheavals affected their holdings, their recruitment, and their loyalties? Did they record moments when the Order's interests diverged from those of the English crown? Without the primary sources, we are left to speculate from shadows. Occasionally, hints emerge, a letter in a private European archive, a stray inventory listing in an unrelated legal case, that suggest the missing records might have been broken up, their contents dispersed piecemeal across centuries. If so, piecing them together would be like assembling a vast puzzle without knowing what the final image should be. Standing today in the quiet reading rooms of historical institutions, one might wonder if some of these missing parchments still survive, tucked in the binding of another book, buried in an overlooked chest in a country estate, or lying in a box mislabeled in a provincial archive. It is a tantalizing thought that the key to an entire lost chapter of medieval England's history could be sitting, unrecognized, on a shelf. And so the question remains, were the Hospitallers' English archives destroyed in an act of tragic accident, or concealed in an act of deliberate intent? And if they were hidden, by whom and for what reason, How long will they remain in the shadows before someone, somewhere, turns the page that brings them back into the light?